Good evening and welcome to the November 12th City Commission meeting in Lawrence. We'll start with the approval of the agenda. The City Commission reserves the right to amend, supplement, or reorder the agenda during the meeting. Does anybody want to change anything on the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Ananda, second by Commissioner Herbert. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Any commissioners want anything pulled off the agenda? No. Is there any member of the public that would like to have something pulled off the agenda for further discussion? Good.
B6A.
Come on. Okay, B6A.
Yeah.
Any other items that need to be pulled? All right.
I'd move that we approve the consent agenda and all claims with the exception of item B6A.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Boley. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. So we'll move on to B6A.
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers. Let me just start by saying I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure exactly what all this means or if I'm reading the ordinance right. But the part I find troubling is where it mentions that someone could be punished for a crime committed by someone else, even if the person accused of the crime has been acquitted of it. I'm also a bit concerned about Part B, where it talks about how a person can also be liable for any other crime committed in pursuance of the intended crime. The language here reminds me of a case from Alabama this past summer where a pregnant black woman got in a fight with another woman. The other woman shot her and the unborn child was killed. The state initially went after the woman who shot the pregnant woman for manslaughter, but after a grand jury decided not to indict the shooter, the state then decided to go after the pregnant woman for the death of her own unborn child, using language similar to that in Section B of this ordinance with the foreseeable consequence part. Maybe I'm wrong, but this just seems as a way for prosecutors to dish out their justice by letting them go after someone else for a crime in case their first choice is found not guilty. Also, I think part of this ordinance is to make it easier for prosecutors to pressure people into narking on each other. I imagine plea bargains will be offered to those accused of aiding a criminal that they won't be held responsible for the crime if they agree to testify against those who actually committed the crime. And I can tell you right now that this is going to have more of an effect on poor people. People with money are going to hire lawyers that can fight a wonky law such as aiding a criminal in a crime after the criminal has been found not guilty of said crime. We have overcrowding going on in our jails the way it is. The last thing we need is making new laws designed to put even more people in jail, with this one being targeted at people who aren't even committing the crimes. So I have a couple of questions for the commissioners. First, equity. What kind of effect do you think this new ordinance will have on the poor and minorities? Two groups already affected disproportionately by the criminal justice system. Second, fairness. Do you think it's fair to punish someone for aiding or abetting a criminal in a crime if the criminal has been found not guilty of said crime? And also, I just want to say, I think this should have been an issue for regular agenda and not consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Does anybody from staff want to talk about that?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Lauren Summers, and I'm one of the city prosecutors for the city of Lawrence, Kansas. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this item. These amendments to both the aiding and abetting statute as well as the interference with the duties of a law enforcement officer statute was requested due to the fact that the Kansas statutes upon which most of the City of Lawrence's criminal code is based had been amended, updated, and changed in order to modernize them, to sort of deal with issues that had come up in cases. And I don't believe that this language changes the fact that the city, the way in which the city would be, I suppose, holding individuals accountable or it doesn't create new criminal liability. It just ensures that we're able to enforce the aiding or abetting statute in the same way as Kansas courts are in districts, state cases, because otherwise, if we get a case like this that isn't covered by some of the language, then we just have to send it up to the district court, or we can't, most of the cases that we use to make legal arguments are based out of district courts. So the language is based on the current state statute, and so we don't know how to interpret or how the Supreme Court would interpret arguments that the defense counsel might bring unless we're able to put it in the context of the current up-to-date and modern statute. As relates to the concern about over-criminalization of individuals who are impoverished, that certainly is something that the city prosecutor's office is in no way interested in doing. It's just ensuring that we are able to hold everyone accountable under the law in the same manner as the state would. And furthermore, our courts provide attorneys to individuals free of charge if they meet income requirements. The intention is to hold individuals accountable for what has been deemed criminally inappropriate behavior already by the state.
Thank you. Any questions for?
Yeah, could you explain how somebody would be charged with aiding and abetting in the aiding and abetting in a criminal activity if the person accused of committing the crime has been acquitted of the crime? How do you aid someone in a crime that they have been legally deemed to have not committed?
So acquitted is sometimes honestly different than not committed. So sometimes evidence can occur at trial where individuals, different witnesses are present, and we're aware of those witnesses at a certain stage in the proceedings, although this is very, very rare. And then more information comes out, and we're able to bring more witnesses to another, a co-defendant's trial, for example. So I can't think of too many instances. It would be a one-off type situation where an individual was acquitted of a crime, and then someone who has aided or abetted that crime is found guilty of that offense. One of the instances that I can think of is where someone has been acquitted due to, I suppose, being found guilty by reason of lacking mental capacity to commit the crime. But someone else who does have the capacity to commit the crime could encourage or assist or make available the means to commit that crime. And so we don't think that that individual is absolved from criminal liability in the same way because they don't lack mental capacity. But that would just be an example. As they teach us in law school, there's 100 of hypotheticals that could happen. But in my time as a city prosecutor in the past 3 years, I've only ever had one charge of aiding or abetting. And that was a situation where the individual assisted in bringing merchandise to the cash register, but then was not the one. They pretended to pay for the items. However, they did not push the cart out of the place of where you could purchase the items. And so technically, therefore, they did not commit the theft because they were not the one who obtained that unlawful control over the property finally.
Okay. Any other questions?
When did the state law change?
I'm afraid I'm not aware of that. I think that it's changed a couple of times, honestly, and more language has been added over the years. I don't think this has been updated at least within the past 10 years. I know that the interference statute that we looked at the same time, I think that the big changes had come to that after a Supreme Court decision holding that you could request stop or identify. So possibly around that time.
Any other questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take public comment on this item. Any public comment about this item?
Ron Wilson, I have a suggestion. I hear words like, sometimes I think, not too many instances. Is there a way that both parties can get together and not make this a fiasco like our Washington DC political animosity arguments seem to be getting? We should be able to talk to each other, come to a peaceful resolution. Right now, I don't believe that the young man here is satisfied. It would cut down on some of the problems that we have.
Thank you, Ron.
I just got to finish signing my name. Thank you.
Any other public comment on this item? Nope.
Dan Dannenberg, 2702 University Drive. The first thing we need to do is to improve the criminal justice system. In the way it is now, it's quite frankly a mess. Some months ago, I sat in on a case in municipal court. The defendant happened to be a black man, and he had lousy representation. It was so bad that the judge had to take over the case and simply do the defendant's lawyer's job. The case should never have been brought for prosecution in the first place. The prosecutor should have had a sit down with the arresting officer and his supervisor and, said, listen, this case does not have a good basis to bring forward a prosecution. And I've seen other cases like that in municipal court. I haven't been there for a while because people don't want you to go to municipal court. It's kind of in the opaque area of city government. But I think we need to get with the state authorities, i.e. the legislature, such as it is, and make sure we get adequate funding and staffing for the judicial system. And I think we need to have a review of some of these cases that are brought to make sure that they are in fact meritorious for prosecution, because I don't think we have that. And I think we need to have some training of police officers. There are good, experienced officers, but I've seen cases where inexperienced officers have made wrong decisions, and they've brought cases or issued citations where they shouldn't have. So that's what we need to do. We need to improve the judicial process.
Thank you, Dan. Any other public comment on this item?
My comment is going to be in support of the cops. I believe that recently in this country...
Sir, your name, please?
My name is Parker Mays. I'm a resident of Lawrence, and I own a company here. My voice is for the support of cops. Lately, there has been a push that has been against what the cops have within their power and jurisdiction. I'm seeing that currently within this present situation. And I believe in what the cops are doing. I believe in the example that was given of the aiding and abetting case whereupon the original person was found not guilty. However, this other person most likely was there and involved, so we should be able to prosecute them. I believe that example that was given with its specifics would be helpful within the language that is in this current law. And I would also want to continue to say again and again that I believe in what the cops are doing. The police force in this town have been doing a good job. And I believe that this should be a way to voice support for them in their efforts and what they are continuing to do. Right now, it has recently been Veterans Day, and I want to support the veterans that are within the cops. Most of the percentages that are within the cop force show a high percentage of veterans. And I believe in them, I believe in this country, and I believe that we will be able to have this corrected.
Thank you, Parker. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, bring it back up here. Any thoughts?
I think it is important to be consistent with state statute. I think that talking broadly about criminal justice reform is an important thing to do. I think in order to have a foundation for that conversation, we need to be consistent so that we can bring case law to the conversation when we do have that conversation.
I see the benefit of consistency as well, although I can't express it as well as you did.
Yeah, I think we need to be consistent with state law and go from there, as well as the criminal justice system. I do believe there's obviously.
Thank you.
Kurt, do we have the mics up? Yes. I'm sorry about that. So yeah, I just talked pretty much the same as Commissioner Nanda, that I believe it's important that we have consistency with state law, and also that I agree that there's some serious issues with our judicial system that needs to obviously be discussed, but that's a conversation that it is not tonight. So thank you. So I'm going to support this. Anybody else? Okay, got a motion?
Move to adopt on first reading ordinance 9686, amending language pertaining to aiding and abetting another person in commission of a crime to be consistent with state statute. Move to adopt. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's on. Can you hear me? Okay. I move that we adopt on first reading ordinance 9686, amending language pertaining to aiding and abetting another person in the commission of a crime to be consistent with state statute.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Nanda, second by Commissioner Boley. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. We'll work on speaking, moving closer to your mics so that folks can hear. I'm not sure what the issue is tonight. Okay, we're going to move on to the public comment portion of our agenda. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda after first being recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state your name and address. Speakers should address all comments and questions directly to the commission. So do we have any general public comments that are not related to what's on the agenda tonight? Yes. You do? Okay.
I have a packet. I would like to
See,
distribute to them individually now or later. My name is Ron Wilson, 627 North 750 Road, Lawrence, Kansas, live out in the county. But this involves the police. As you read these documents, I hope you will not object to some of the language I use. just as your 12 or 16-year-old children should not object when they are threatened by a police officer with a violent verbal threat. I do not give up. I'm only reading the highlighted, the underlined portions. I cannot give up, as I have more honor than the police person that makes threats and is egged on by a bunch of other bullies. I am true to myself and my wife. Have you ever been threatened by a police person with violence against you, which would result in your death or deadly injuries, and been denied justice in a police cover-up? Some people don't know why we have laws. I requested an investigation. I called back. I was told it was closed, was given no further information, was told it was closed by the captain and his chief. I have at least 2 shotguns. If they are aimed at entry points and wired to go off, if a door or window is open, that is against the law. So is the hate crime the police person is trying to do to me. I have pulled my gun twice within the last month in my house. I have found a person standing in my house. Luckily, he identified himself. I knew who he was after he turned around. Last November, I had a gun pulled on me in a store as I was talking to the cashier. I do not like being threatened by the police or intimidated to change my statement by any police chief. And I think you have a copy of the email that I gave you last week in that package of information. Or have my investigation stopped for any reason. Well, I said no reason. I am therefore requesting a full investigation into this abuse of power and position within the Lawrence Police Force. And that's the end of the underlined portion.
Thank you, Ron.
I hope I can hear from somebody.
Thank you, Ron, I appreciate it. Thank you. Any other general public comment on items not related or not on the actual agenda?
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers. Last week, it was in the paper how a plan to build 8 affordable housing units on Pennsylvania Street has been scrapped due to whiny neighbors complaining about population density. So instead, it sounds like they're just going to build 2 regular houses. I just want to say that Plan 2040, the plan that calls for an increase in our population density, is off to a great start. I don't know if this is possible, but would it be possible for the city to reach out to the property owners and at least let them know that under the new Plan 2040, that the population density argument that the neighbors used as a reason against the affordable homes is actually an argument for not only what the city wants to achieve, but it's also what's best for all of Lawrence and not just best for a select few. Maybe it's not something that the city can do, but if property owners are going to be having neighborhood meetings or reaching out to neighborhood associations when trying to build new property that benefits the city, I think the city should at least be reaching out to the property owners and stating the city's reasons as to what's best for the city. When there are NIMBYs advocating for themselves, the rest of the town needs someone advocating for what's best for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other general public comment on items not related to the agenda?
Dan Dannenberg, 2702 University Drive. This is sort of a follow-up to the previous comment. We need channels of communication between the city and citizens. We don't have that. We have this crummy meeting space here, and we all get to come up and yap for 3 minutes, and oh yeah, I'm a bigoted, racist scumbag, so I should be silenced. And we don't have that channel of communication where we can get with the city. An example of this is Topeka, as uncivilized as it is, they have a policy of coffee with a cop, where a cop will go and meet with members of the public for an hour or so and sit down and discuss, you know, whatever's on the minds of the citizens. We would never have that in this town. We don't have that policy or practice that I know of anyway. When the present chief first took office, I brought that up at a meeting he was speaking at, and he brushed it off, saying that these meetings would be dominated by certain individuals and they wouldn't be productive. But I think we need to have some kind of a meeting or some channel that we can get issues to the city. To come up here and stand for 3 minutes and rant on, that doesn't work. And to send emails that go off into the ether and are never responded to, or, you know, and it's only going to get worse with the new commissioner coming on. It'll get worse because we know that they will be, particularly one of them will be working for the oligarchs.
Dan, I just wanted to point out that we do have a program with the police that they, once a month, they go to and have coffee at a place. I just went to one a few weeks ago up there at Wake the Dead, I believe, that restaurant downtown. So they do that. However, I don't disagree with you. We are working on our communication. I know that's something that's strong on Craigslist, that we need to increase have better communication. And we're working on it, but thank you.
I'm Alex Rodriguez, live at 2333 Ridge Court. I'm here on the behalf of several members of the houseless community who I work with and who have approached me to speak on their predicament. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, on any given night there are at least 553,000 houseless individuals in this country. Yet Amnesty International USA reports that there are 5 times as many vacant homes as there are houseless people. Of course, that number is a low estimate and does not take into account those with unstable or temporary housing or those of us who couch surf, but have no place to truly call home. Furthermore, in December of 2017, Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, concluded that in many cities, homeless persons are effectively criminalized for the situation in which they find themselves. Sleeping rough, sitting in public places, panhandling, public urination in cities that provide almost 0 public toilets, and myriad other offenses have been devised to attack the blight of homelessness. My own experiences and those of my houseless friends and comrades in the city verify that Lawrence itself is one of those cities that effectively criminalizes and brutally punishes our most vulnerable citizens, the houseless. As such, I call on this City Commission to strongly reconsider and repeal the measures taken to actively harm and discourage the houseless members of our community, including the cutting of funding to the shelter and the imposition of City Ordinances 14-417 regarding illegal camping, which makes it impossible for any houseless person to simply exist in our community in public spaces that our tax dollars pay for, as well as 14-418, which has been repeatedly used as justification to harass and attack houseless people throughout the community, both by law enforcement and private citizens under the guise of fighting aggressive panhandling. Furthermore, we know that many of these measures taken to criminalize the houseless community were lobbied and advocated for by Downtown Lawrence, Inc. and other corporate bodies, and I firmly believe that the needs of the people of the city should come before the profit-generating desires of the wealthy among us, whose only concern is furthering their own financial interests. And I sincerely hope that as officials and servants of the city, you all would agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Stuart Luckman, 1515 Ingle Road. Any functioning society must decide its political decisions based on ethical and just policy. If any governmental unit fails at this duty, citizens of said government have good reason to protest, demand action, and ultimately oppose all actions of said government. The way that the city of Lawrence deals with its houseless is a fundamental violation of human dignity, betraying its leaders as either inherently cruel or terminally unconcerned. The National Coalition for the Homeless argues in December of 2018 that the houseless suffer from poor living conditions, which makes their life expectancies 20 years shorter than the average person. The composite effects of years of poor health care, malnutrition, and disease would take their toll on any person. It is an unimaginably cruel form of suffering, which we are morally obligated to mitigate. Not only is our collective compassion lacking, many strike out with pure malice. 20 years of hate crimes against the houseless have been recorded, with 1,769 reported acts and 476 ultimately proving lethal. These despicably evil crimes must be stopped immediately, and the institutions with the most leverage to act are localities. A new city commission is in place, and it is now up to them to act or to be thrown into the dustbin of history. The city commission must be swift and effective in any possible policy proposal. This should take the form of targeting affordable housing to tackle one of the root causes of houselessness within the city. A 2018 BBC report found that 5,200 households were unduly burdened with their financial obligations. Furthermore, 700 households were at risk of immediately becoming houseless. In situations like these, there can be no half measures. Lawrence must immediately funnel as much resources as possible into resolving this dilemma as agenda item number 1. It must be stressed that even when this is accomplished, your work is not over. Less than a month ago, 2 houseless people were murdered in Wichita. The problem is close to home, and Lawrence must pay attention to the people most directly harmed by its recent draconian policies on taxation and housing. Remove regressive fees such as the August utility fee proposals, find a more progressive method of funding the local economy, and place resources into the hands of the most marginalized. Only when Lawrence stops blinding itself to this crisis can the city be called an ethical and just society. Going forward, the wise words of Friedrich Engels and the condition of the working class in England are especially poignant. When society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet too early in a natural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by the sword or the bullet, when it deprives thousands of the necessaries of life, placing them under conditions which they cannot live, forces them through the strong arm of the law to remain in such conditions until that death ensures, which is inevitable consequence, know that these victims must perish, and yet these permits is deed as murder just as surely as the deed of a single
Thank you,
individual.
Stuart. Any other general public comment? Okay. All right, thank you. So we will move on to regular agenda. Oh, I did want to, Craig, if we could look into the situation with Ron Wilson.
Yeah, yes, Mayor.
I appreciate it. Okay. So our first item on the regular agenda is consider authorizing the city manager to execute a change order number 1 to the construction management agreement with Turner Construction in the amount of $1,004,189 for the police facility Phase 1 project.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Melinda Harger with Municipal Services and Operations. Tonight, we have for you a construction update on the police facility project, as well as a funding recommendation to complete the shelled spaces, 3 of the shelled spaces within the main building. So many driving by the site at 5100 Overland Drive would not, or are not able to see the construction progress. So we have a bird's eye view to share tonight. This video was taken last Friday, and as you recall, the building design allows for access at ground level for both levels. It basically has a walkout lower level, and you can see here that the fill on the south side of the site is actually hiding from view from the street the progress on that lower level. Some of the progress that has taken place to date includes completed footings for the lower level, concrete walls, and the first course of CMU block is also going in. What you cannot see from these images is that a lot of the site utilities are also complete. The stormwater system, the water line loop around the facility, as well as the sanitary sewer connections to the building. So I wanted to also recap the police facility budget. This is the same budget breakdown that was shown back in August. We haven't had any changes to it. As you can see here, design was $1.32 million. We also have construction phase services, that's testing, construction administration going on right now at $430,000. The construction GMP budget here is slightly above what the actual GMP contract is set at. We always like our budgets to be higher than the actual amounts. The furniture and equipment budget, we're looking at not going through that procurement until 2020, but that money is set aside here for furniture and equipment. And then we still have our $250,000 project contingency. So the shelled areas that we want to talk about tonight are shown here in the floor plan in green. These were the alternate bid areas. Administration and investigations are shown there on the upper level with the crime lab on the lower level. These 3 alternate bid items are the ones that we're recommending at this time, but you'll also see there was shelled space also in that vehicle storage building, and we're looking at bringing that forward as a future funding request. So a breakdown of those 3 alternate bid items under consideration tonight. We have here what the bid prices came in at during the time of that bidding for the GMP, and also the estimated savings based on the 2021 cost estimates. There's a breakdown of what those cost estimates would be for 2021 and some future years as well. So this is the minimum savings that you could see. The further it's pushed out, of course, those costs would go up, and so that's even more realized savings by doing this now. Some of those additional costs that you have by waiting to, if you did not do it, it's part of this contract. There's remobilization, there would be rebids included, material and labor escalation as you get into future years. There's some savings here by using staff and some of the general conditions that are already contracted for with Turner Construction. And also there's costs when you do work out of sequence. So there's temporary walls that have to be put in, some accommodations for those shelled spaces in terms of extending electrical and HVAC to them in the future, where if you already have those trades out at your site, you're able to put those in at a lower cost. Again, these 3 alternate items, as well as some of the others, had the decision deadline of January 1st. So when we brought this to you in August, we said we would go back and look at a funding recommendation, and that's what we have for you tonight. Items that we're not asking for tonight, but we just want to make sure they're on your radar. The furniture and equipment for these shelled spaces, that would be a future funding request. Here's an estimate that we have right now. Again, we'll be using some of the government pricing for this equipment, and we'll know more about that when all of the equipment and furniture has been selected in 2020. We would have a good idea of what those items would be for the shelled spaces. And then also, this is the future cost for the vehicle storage. This is the 2021 cost if it had to be rebid to finish that space. I wanted to mention that although we're listing these here as future funding items, if there is any savings from that contingency that we have set aside, that could be applied to some of these costs in the future. Now I'm going to turn it over to Captain Anthony Brixius.
Thank you, Melinda. Mayor, Commissioners, excited to be with you here. And as I recall back in August, it was an exciting moment for us to get going on this. And while we've been doing this since about 2011, this commission has certainly been an important part of these pieces and moving it forward. I want to talk a little bit about the spaces that we're bringing up tonight and what their significance is and why this is an important deal, along with the cost savings. So the first space that we're really looking at is the investigations division, and this houses about 26 employees, 22 of which are sworn. The investigations division is responsible for major investigations, usually serious person felonies. And while they certainly have contact with officers on scenes, one of the things that you'll hear over and over from me tonight is the interaction that they're going to be able to have and the ability to solve cases by having those water cooler talks, by having those training moments, by having those personal interactions. I sat with a detective today who told me that when he started, it was as a young officer, he would go to detectives and ask them about cases and ask them how to get better. And today he sits and doesn't know the names of some of the officers because he's never worked with them. This space is about 9,000 square feet, and it comes at future savings at least of $140,000. To put the perspective of what you're getting here, you're getting about 20% of your finished square footage for about 5% of the building cost. So while it certainly means a lot with the people in there and the space, you are certainly getting value, and the citizens are getting value as well. The crime lab is really associated with the investigations division, and so while it does say it has up to 3 occupancy, I have accounted for that occupancy within the investigations division. We are not unique in that we do some of our own crime scene processing. But the ability to do that actually speeds up cases quite a bit. So right now, we have a very small room that we have the ability to do that in. To understand the crime scene process, the crime scene person or detective will go out and they'll collect the evidence. But where it slows down sometimes is that we have to submit these things to the KBI, or in some cases, the Johnson County Forensics Lab. The KBI certainly is busy and backlog, and we've had cases take 2 and 3 years to get back to us. And while we're not able to do every kind of case that they're able to do, we're certainly able to expedite that process by doing some of the original steps. We also use the Johnson County Crime Lab, which is a fee that we pay for, and we typically do that if it's something like a homicide case where we know that we need the information back at a quick amount of time to help solve the case. While this lab doesn't solve all those problems, it does certainly mitigate them and give us more opportunities to use the highly trained people that we already have. So administration. Currently, administration is housed at the Investigations and Training Center, and so I want to paint the picture for you of the amount of employees, certainly just within patrol, where you have approximately 85 or so employees that are really your daily contact with the citizens, the ones who are out there on the street responding to calls. And currently, there's no office of the chief in the law enforcement center, and that was due just largely to space. At one point, we had not enough space to house the chief or any administrative staff there. So at times, by no fault of anything other than location, there's a disconnect. And so when we talk about this force of 26 and then 86 with the patrol, these are your biggest portion of your operations. There's some smaller operations groups, but certainly having the administration interact with those people to have day-to-day conversations helps us make better decisions, helps us serve the community a little bit better. Melinda brought up the vehicle storage building as a future funding request, and staff is not recommending it at this time, but I do kind of want to point it out to you because it is a construction savings. That's only one part of what we're looking at. So you see the garage doors, and as you see the vehicle building right now, that is how a member of the public would see it. What would be missing is actually inside to the left, where it will not house employees, but it will serve about 45, and as I thought this through, it's probably closer to 60 employees because this has to do with our crisis response team, our negotiators, our traffic accident people, and a lot of their equipment will be stored in here, and then also the ability to do some planning and training and things like that. Again, it's not part of the recommendation tonight, and it's not part of the recommendation because one of the things that is really important in this, along with the savings, is the ability to have the people in one place. So when we were here in August, you asked us to come back with a funding recommendation. And I initially thought, boy, this is going to be a really difficult task. And I thought that because we've gone through a budget process in which all these things are measured against each other, right? And we talk a lot about the different priorities that we have. And it would certainly be difficult for me to come back and say that somebody else's priorities were no longer a priority. So I didn't want to do that, and I got with Melinda, and we got with finance and city staff, and we really started to look at things that were already within the police department's control, because I think that's the most appropriate thing to use in this situation. And what we see is a big discrepancy in salary, and so I think it's somewhat important for me to help understand why that's occurring. Because I believe that the city budgets a certain amount of salary expecting that we can provide a certain amount of service and that we have a certain amount of police officers on the street to provide that service. In this case, it goes clear back into the 90s in which we hired 2 very, very large classes, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think one's 26 and one's maybe in the teens. And if you can do the math and you know that a police officer can retire in their early 50s and they have 20-something years of service, you'll know that many of those people have retired. And so in 2017, the department returned $1.4 million to the general fund. Most of that is in salary. In 2018, you saw $1.8 million. And right now, with the help of Jeremy, we're estimating about $1.7 million. It could be more because we still have vacant positions. The reason for that is in part the retirements. There's been 25 retirements since 2017. That doesn't take into effect our normal attrition. Our standard attrition from about 2011 to 2016 was about 8 people. So when you add the 8 people per year and you add the 25 retirements, we're up around 50 people, and that's about a third of our sworn staff. Now, it hasn't gone without us trying to address this. We've taken steps that we really never took before, which is holding experienced hire classes. We tried once, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, to do an academy. We've now brought in experienced officers from like jurisdictions and tried to pay them a salary that would make them want to come to Lawrence and provide some of those experiences. For many, many years, we ran one academy, and for the last 3 years, we've run 2 academies. Couple that with a dwindling pool, where when I started, there was about 300 applicants for roughly 12 positions, and now we get into the 50s and the 40s and the 30s sometimes, the people that actually show up for testing. So I wanted to paint that picture for you, not to say that the police department has saved away their money. We want to do everything that we can to provide the service level that you all have asked us to provide within your budgets. But it is the realization that we're at. And it provides a unique opportunity where we have the ability to bring some of those people together and maybe increase our manpower through our abilities and our interaction, and then also save a considerable amount of money for our residents, for the city, on a project that is going, in theory, going to be completed because it's shelled space anyway. I also want to point out that with this, it's a one-time capital cost. So this is not a reoccurring cost like the salary. So this one-time opportunity really gives us the chance to save some money now. In the memo that Ms. Harder and I provided for you, there were some alternative funding options, and we can certainly speak to those. We chose the salary savings because we thought it was the most applicable, and some of these projects haven't been completed yet, but we do expect to see some savings. Certainly with the police radios, that I believe part of which was approved last week, and certainly with the ITC repairs, because we didn't know the realities that we now have today and what we could potentially have in this police facility. So the 2 places that we currently occupy, you know, I was proud that the commission had set forth a goal for us to leave the law enforcement center, and we were able to do that, and we were actually able to exceed that by getting some of these shelled spaces. Assistant City Manager Diane Sauter and I, the legal staff, we've looked over some of the original documents, it's interesting to go through that history and see how things were documented, or in some cases not documented. But as we look through that, we believe that the city has an ownership interest in somewhere around 14 to 15% of that space. We know that we were allotted 10,000 square feet of space that was not to be shared. We currently occupy about 5,500. So we've been exchanging information with the county to make sure that we are on the same page, and I believe that we'll probably enter into some sort of negotiations, or at least discussions sometime here in the near future. The maintenance budget for that is actually just based on their cost, and they bill us about 15% of the total fees, and our budget for that is $114,000, or at least it will be in 2020. It was $112,000 this year. So the ITC, I think all along, as we expected to be in this new facility, we thought we would completely occupy the investigations and training center. Investigations takes up most of that, and certainly most of the people. And by approving this tonight, what you do is you put the city in a unique position that they can actually look at the sale or reappropriation of the ITC, because we'll have about 5 training staff that are housed there, and then the people who are in the academy, and then we have a very small specialized investigations unit out there. So if the city wanted to go forward and look to make a sale or look to make a transition in how that facility was used, we would be we'd have a lot of ability to be nimble and to be able to do that. And the operating budget for that is about $135,000, and then there's also some janitorial fees in that, which is about $12,000 as well. The next 2 slides I have in here, they're really with great purpose. And as we looked at the money that the City Commission allocated for this building, we really started talking about a campus. And some of the things that we talked about initially was having patrol, and then maybe building for investigations and the pieces that go along with it. As we really got to start talking with staff, I got so many times that doesn't solve our problem. It just puts us a little bit closer to walk across the street, but it's not the same interaction that you have every day. And we really would like to be together in the same facility, in the same place. So with the help of our design team and certainly staff's input, I wanted to show this picture because when you're an employee for the Lawrence Police Department, you will walk in the vestibule and you will turn left, and this is what you will come into every day. Everybody will come into the same interest. It's a big open area. It was designed that way with great intent. If I go left, I'm probably going to the patrol division. If I go right, I'm probably going to do evidence or crime scene. There's a enlarged stair just up the corner, which is big enough to have conversations, which is very intently done. As I go upstairs, and I would be in investigations divisions, or I could go to the right and be in administration. And I tell you that because the entire design of this building was to be able to have those conversations, to be able to be together, to be able to solve crimes. And I say that, and it's quite true as far as our ability to interact and maybe learn something about a crime scene, maybe teach one another. And you heard someone say earlier that we have a very young staff, and that's very true. I've just told you about the attrition that we had. And knowing someone and saying, can you help me? Can you show me how to do this? Is a very important, and it's a real thing. And you're going to hear me talk about what effect you're going to have on the police department, but decisions that you may make tonight, you'll never know what effect you're going to have on the victims of crimes, the victims of robberies, the victims of domestic violence, by teaching a staff that's a better police department. So I told you the slides were with great intent, and this is the second slide that is with great intent. And what you see here is the public entrance to the police department. And if I ask most people in the audience, where's the entrance to the police department, you might get 2 or 3 different answers. I know that because every single week we have multiple people come to the wrong door, to the wrong building. And I want you to imagine for a minute, if you would, if you're trying to get help and you're looking for the place that you get help and you come to the building that is closed, or it's not an emergency situation and you're just trying to get your dog back, or you're trying to speak with someone who you thought was at that building, and then you now spend 15 minutes to go across town, or they spend 15 minutes to go across town. And so I put this slide in here because I think this is a great thing for the public to be able to know where they can come and receive the help that they're looking for, or the assistance, whatever it may be. So with that, we're here also with Turner and Hafer-Wysocki, and Ms. Harger and I would stand for any questions.
Any questions?
I have a kind of a curiosity question. In that lab, would you be able to process sexual assault kits?
I'm sorry?
Would you be able to process sexual assault kits in that lab?
Yeah, so they would be stored there, and we would be able to process some of the things that are going into the kits, but it wouldn't be a complete turnaround, right, to be able to have the DNA. So the DNA portion is what we would be missing. But we would be able to prep those things, which would expedite the process for the KBI later.
Thank you.
Any questions? Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you. So we will open it up to public comment at this time on this item. Any public comment on this item?
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Sam Hyatt. I'm a detective with the Police Department and the Vice Chair of the Lawrence Police Officers Association. Just wanted to hit on a few things that Captain Brixius covered. First, I want to thank you for your time and all of the city employees that have contributed time and work, specifically Captain Brixius and Ms. Harger. I've worked in the Police Department since 2008, and ever since then there's been discussion about a new building and reuniting staff. I've been in the ITC since 2014. I'm not going to go into too many issues of the ITC. I believe several, if not all of you, have been to the ITC and seen the condition of the building. The ongoing maintenance issues are a concern. Some of the things I do want to point out are it's difficult at times to keep victims, witnesses, and suspects from coming into contact with each other there, especially in that main area, and that can be a trauma for people. So with the design of the new building, that's something that's taken into effect that we can hope to avoid. And there's limited room for growth at the investigations center. So any growth to the investigations division is going to be limited by the building we're in now. The shortcomings of being able to interact with patrol on a daily basis is a concern. We rely on patrol investigations to solve crimes. They are our first contact with our victims, witnesses, and suspects. The information they gather is paramount to our investigations. And we often have to rely on their written reports to get that information to us, since we don't have that daily interaction. Those reports can be delayed for various reasons. There can be information left out of those reports. Just the finer details, the things that may not be thought about being put in those reports, that's important to solving crimes. And being able to interact with those patrol officers on a daily basis is very beneficial to be able to solve crimes, understand what's necessary for victims, any kind of special considerations victims or witnesses may need that's just not intentionally going to be put in a report, because those reports are going to be potentially publicly available, or at least given to defense teams. It's been touched on that our department is relatively new. Of our 70 patrol officers, roughly 38 of those have less than 5 years experience on our department. Oftentimes our detectives and our patrol officers don't know each other, and that eliminates the ability to collaborate, to share experiences. The ability for us to be there in the same building gives us the opportunity to collaborate, share experiences, assist with investigations, follow-up, things like that. And then the last two things I want to hit on was...
Sam, your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment on this item? Okay, we'll bring it back up.
Could I ask one question really quickly of Captain Brixius? Are you able to quantify for us tonight if we moved forward with a full build-out versus kind of staggering it in phases? What sort of savings are we looking at tonight projected?
So tonight, it was 300,000. The additional outbuilding is another 100,000 on that. And then future phases have not been designed yet.
Okay. Thoughts on this?
Well, that's why we're building a new building, is to bring them all together, so.
Yeah.
I appreciate the proposal. I think it's well thought out, and I appreciate the work that's been done on it. Thank you.
And I think as we're looking in the next few years at a serious investment in infrastructure, any savings we can have on the front end that we're not spending in the future is responsible with our taxpayers' money, so.
Yeah, I kind of hate the sports metaphor thing, but the whole time I was listening to this, all I kept thinking is what we're asking our police department to do right now effectively is perform as a team, but then at halftime we send them to 2 separate locker rooms, and then we ask them to come out and somehow achieve. Moving forward, we need to have a unified facility where there's no reason for your chief to be in a separate building than those people he or she are supposed to be overseeing. And I think what's important for us to do tonight, as Captain Brixius pointed out very eloquently, is that we need to look at this in terms of remobilization cost, temporary structure cost. When you have these shelled spaces, you're obviously going to have those temporary structure overages. In the construction industry, anybody who's ever done any work in that knows that you're dealing with constant inflationary increases that oftentimes exceed inflationary cost. And so I think our most fiscally responsible move right now is to do as much of the build out as we can now, particularly given the savings and salary that Captain Brixius has pointed out.
So I just want to point out that the proposal to build this shell area, the shelled space, originally the intent was just to have the shelled space, and at some point in the future we would finish building that out. So this is an opportunity that has come up where the funding has become available. So it's not as though we're over budget. We're not. This is an opportunity where we can save the 300,000 plus possibly 100,000 more in order to do the build out of an area that we were going to do at some point in the future. What I really appreciated was the fact that under the original proposal at the time, only 66% of our staff would be there, be able to be in that building with the shelled spaces. With the proposal to finish the shelled spaces, we can now house 83 to 91% of our staff. So that's getting really close to the point to where we're going to obviously have our staff there. And it would also, by moving forward with this part of the project, it will give us an opportunity to possibly look at spending less money at the ITC, which eventually we want to get rid of. So if we can spend less money at the ITC, again, those are some more cost savings that we can look at. So I'm very much in support of this. I think there's some significant cost savings that we're going to realize. And this is space we were always going to build at some point. We've now got an opportunity to do that because of the funding that we have been able to come up with for it. And so I think we should move forward with it.
Agree.
So, motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion. I would make a motion to authorize the city manager to execute change order 1 to the construction management agreement with Turner Construction in the amount of $1,004,189 for the police facility Phase 1 project CIP number PD 1803. And the direction that I would provide is that we look at the opportunity to build out as many sheltered spaces as we can, as quickly as we can for cost-saving purposes.
Second.
With regard to the funding, are you recommending that we use the salary money that's been recommended by staff?
Yes.
That would be my preference, yes. Is that, Sherry, is that work?
And
Okay.
that's part of your motion?
Yes.
Thank you.
Second.
We're good? Okay. Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Soden. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, item F, we're on to commission items. Are there any future agenda items that any commissioner wants to add to the? That's item number 1. Item number 2, future work session items to add. Anybody? On to item 3, are there any other items that a commissioner wants to discuss?
I'm just verifying that we remove the downtown draft from next week's agenda.
Say that again.
That we remove the downtown draft from next week's agenda.
Yes, the downtown master plan
Oh.
will be delayed till a future meeting.
And I was curious, since there wasn't because of course there's not a city manager report, there's no future agenda items that we already know that we're going to have next week. So are there any big items next week that, because I know it was just the downtown draft plan, so I just want to make sure there's nothing else.
If I can take a look, we may have had some of that last week. I can take a look and see what I can find, Commissioner, if you might give me a few minutes.
Thank
I
you.
could maybe report at the end of the meeting.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. I got one item, and essentially this is for Sherry Reardon. She has completed 4-year coursework in the International Institute of Municipal Clerks, and she's going to graduate Thursday night. That's right. So I just want to congratulate you and thank you for pursuing that further training. I appreciate that. Okay, is that it for other items? Move on to the calendar. Any items we need to add to the calendar? No? We're good? Okay.
I would move adjournment.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Soden. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. So we're done with our regular agenda. We're going to go into the work session now, but I would like to go ahead and take a 10-minute break because this will be long. All right, we're back. I'm going to ask everybody to speak into their mics a little bit more. They're still having problems hearing us in the audience. And I know Kurt has, he's going to turn those mics up as loud as he can. So we will try our best to speak a little louder and more directly. Can you hear us over there in the corner? Okay, great. All right, we're on to the work session. So the work session provides an opportunity for the City Commission to discuss items in greater detail. As a general practice, the Commission will not make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Public comment related to the work session topics will be allowed at the end of the discussion on each item. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. Our first item is to receive an update from staff on progress related to drafting a document codifying city policies and practices concerning immigrants and direct staff as appropriate.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Maria Garcia, Assistant City Attorney, and I'll just move the mic closer before I get started. Okay, so this agenda item is a follow-up to the City Commission's work session that happened on October 8th of this year, so just about a month ago. At the end of that meeting, when the City Commission heard a report from city staff on existing city policies related to immigrants and immigration status, the city manager reported that staff would have a follow-up to that within about 30 days. And so to stay true to that deadline, staff has been working very diligently and hard on this project. I do want to state at the outset that what is presented tonight from city staff is a work in progress. These are drafts and draft language. We certainly welcome input and additional direction. As you said, Mayor Larson, there is no vote tonight. It's just a work session. So again, everything is just in draft format. So with that, I wanted to provide a roadmap of what I would be covering this evening. I'll review the City Commission's most recent direction from October 8th and what staff was tasked with doing since then. Second, I'll review the overarching city draft of what we've come up with as far as codifying existing city policies. I'll provide an update from the Human Relations Commission meeting that occurred last week, which was also part of Commission direction, as I'll explain. 4, I'll talk about next steps, so what happens after tonight's meeting. And then finally, we'll receive an update from the police chief, who is here to talk about a status update on the police policies related to this matter. So the City Commission's most recent direction was on October 8th, 2019 at its work session, and there were several things staff was directed to do since then. So number 1, we were to consider current city practices and codify existing policies related to immigrants. We have been reviewing carefully requests made by Sanctuary Alliance during a presentation on October 8th, as well as a letter or a memo that was submitted for that agenda item. And in addition to that, staff has had 3 actual sit-down in-person meetings with representatives from Sanctuary Alliance. So we are, like I said, working diligently and really trying to receive as much input on these drafts as possible. Our second task was to gauge interest from the Human Relations Commission on whether it feels expanding its scope of duties to include studying and addressing immigration issues in Lawrence is within its capacity. Third, we were to provide an opinion on what policies, as suggested by Sanctuary Alliance, the city can potentially implement. And finally, staff is also studying the addition of immigration status as a protected class under Chapter 10. There was some discussion among commissioners on October 8th about adding that language to Chapter 10, and so that is also a work in progress. So with that, I'd like to start with the highlights of the overarching city document that was submitted as part of the agenda packet tonight, the entire policy. So for purposes of this presentation, I won't go through it line by line, but I'll hit on some highlights that are there. And before I start, I wanted to let you know that I'll be prepared after providing these highlights with a so-called scorecard, as some commissioners put it last time, of what language from Sanctuary Alliance is incorporated into the city draft and which parts of that memo are not incorporated, and then reasons why. So I'll start with the purpose of the city document, and that is to codify existing city practices related to the provision of city services to persons regardless of immigration status. It is the intent of the city to comply with local, state, and federal laws while strongly discouraging unlawful discrimination and fostering a welcome and safe environment for all individuals. Section 2 of the draft concerns applicability. This draft will apply to all city employees and departments. And then the third section is over definitions, and there are only 4, but they were relevant to the policy. For example, we define ICE because we use the acronym ICE throughout the draft. We wanted to identify that as the federal agency. We also identified alienage because that was a term used in the Sanctuary Alliance memo. We defined resident because when we talk about providing services to residents, we mean persons who live in the city of Lawrence, Kansas. Section 4 of the draft is entitled Provision of City Services, and this is kind of an overarching section that will apply to every employee, every department. You'll see later that there is a more specific section for each department, but this is one that will apply to everyone. So as a general matter, no employee under this language shall collect immigration-related information in the provision of city services, including policing, unless otherwise required by law or policies. An example of where unless otherwise required by law or policies is spelled out would be if somebody is convicted in municipal court, there is a state statute that requires that person to be fingerprinted, and on that fingerprint card there is a question about citizenship that the person can answer. It's the person that fills out that card. And then there's also U and T visas that the police department might be able to help with. In that case, the collection of immigration information would be a necessary component of that, and I think the chief of police will be able to provide more insight on that. Secondly, no employee shall discriminate on the basis of alienage or immigration status. Employees and departments that require individuals to provide identification shall accept any valid photo identification that provides the person's name and photo. And that section of this draft provides a list of examples of what identification would be acceptable. So that includes any document issued by a nation of origin of any individual, a student ID, driver's license, even a foreign driver's license, a passport. And there is one caveat under this that those forms of identifications are acceptable for everything except when applying for employment for the city. There are federal laws that require certain types of identification. And then, of course, when somebody is driving a motor vehicle in Lawrence, they will need to have a valid driver's license to do that. Wouldn't be able to show a student ID, for example, in that case. Additional language is that any service, benefit, or opportunity provided by a City of Lawrence department shall be made available to all persons residing in the city, regardless of immigration status, unless otherwise required by law. And then there is a requirement for language services when possible to increase access to those city services. So Section 5 talks about continuing city practices, and this is the section I was talking about when I said there would be specific reference to city departments. So it starts with the Lawrence Police Department and a requirement that those department members comply with department policies, which again, the Chief of Police will be able to provide some insight on tonight. The Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical Department provides emergency services to individuals in need, regardless of immigration status. The Lawrence Municipal Court shall not, unless required by law, inquire about the immigration status of any person charged, initiate contact with federal immigration enforcement officials to report immigration status information, should that for whatever reason be learned. The municipal court must provide interpretation services as required by law, and no inquiry can be made on immigration status. City prosecutors shall not initiate the transfer of immigration information to ICE unless required by law, and the city prosecutor is required to negotiate plea agreements in a just and appropriate manner. Immigration status shall never be a bar to diversion programs. And then finally, for municipal court, public defenders under contract with the city should advise defendants on potential immigration consequences, and those defenders should also advise such defendants to seek counsel from a trained immigration attorney. There is language at the end of that section that states the city shall provide reference to a resource that lists immigration attorneys that might be able to assist somebody who is going through a case in municipal court. Moving on to finance. City utility services like water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater shall never be denied to any city resident on the basis of a person's immigration status.
And that section of the draft lists the documents needed to set up a utilities account, which include name, social security number, or tax ID, and if neither of those are available, a passport. A second form of identification, date of birth, phone number, and email, that's an optional provision. If a person is unable to provide any of that information, the service would still be provided to them, but an additional deposit would be requested or required, and that is the equivalent to 2 months of service, which is about $150. And again, I think it was discussed at the October 8th meeting, but the reason for that additional deposit requirement is to protect the city from any person who doesn't pay the water bill, and it keeps rates reasonable for everybody. So that is why that's applied. Moving on to parks and recreation, city facilities and services shall never be denied to any resident of the city on the basis of a person's immigration status. And under this section, there are documents listed of how a person can establish residency in Lawrence, to include their driver's license, homeowner's insurance policy, property tax statement, vehicle registration, or a mortgage or lease document. So if a person is renting an apartment, for example, they would be able to show that document to prove that they live within the city to take advantage of that particular service. Immigration status for transit shall never be a factor in determining whether a person may utilize the city's transit services. There was also some discussion about the library. Identification and proof of residency are required to obtain a library card, but immigration status shall not be considered in the granting of a library card. Immigration status shall not prohibit any person from renting out the library's auditorium or using its computers. In the city clerk's office, immigration status shall not prohibit such person from applying for and being granted a license, permit, or registration through the city clerk's office except as required by law. And we noted those exceptions on October 8th. There are state statutes that require citizenship for a pawnbroker license or to get a liquor or a cereal malt beverage license. And then the city clerk must provide language translation services to any person upon request. Human resources shall strive to recruit and hire a diverse workforce and shall utilize diversity-focused job boards and minority associations in recruitment activities whenever possible. And then finally, for human resources, that department shall comply with laws regarding employment eligibility and employment records, but shall otherwise not collect, inquire, or disseminate immigration status information. And human resources shall conduct review of the city's internal policies and diversity training and help with appropriate amendments, in addition to suggesting any changes. And then finally, communications and creative resources shall implement a translation subscription service to allow staff to speak with non-English speaking customers on the phone or in person. And written materials online should have an option to translate the web page into other language. And I did want to share with you something new that has happened within the last 2 weeks. So after our work session, there is now an option on the city's main page to translate. If you just scroll to the very bottom here, you click on this and then select a language. So I'll click Spanish, and then it will translate the entire page. And I think that will improve accessibility. If somebody would like to apply for a job, they can click on this link and get all of that information. So I'll move now into the comparison of the Sanctuary Alliance requests and the items that are included in that overarching city draft, otherwise known as the scorecard. So the request was for language that states that the city will not collect immigration-related information in the provision of city services, including policing unless otherwise required by law. That language was included in the city's general overarching draft under Section 4A. The request was for language about discriminating and serving all residents regardless of alienage or immigration status. That was included in 4B. And then accepting other forms of identification and working to develop a comprehensive list of acceptable ID documentation is in 4C. Not allowing local funds, personnel, facilities to be used for immigration enforcement is partially included. We have inserted language stating that the enforcement of federal immigration laws is a matter of federal jurisdiction only. And we have also included language stating that if the police department were to ever desire to enforce federal immigration law, they would have to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the United States. And before even doing that, it would have to meet city commission approval, so it would be a public process for that. So that's under 4F, and it addresses the use of local resources for the enforcement of federal law. Moving on, the request was for language prohibiting city prosecutors from transferring information to ICE. That's under the city's general policy, section 5C5. Immigration consequences should be considered in plea negotiations, and lack of status should never be a bar to diversion programs. That is partially included in the city's general policy under 5C6. The request was for immigration consequences to be considered in plea negotiations, but we have language in there that states the prosecutor can't ask about somebody's immigration status, and so if they can't ask for it, they also would have a hard time considering that for a plea negotiation. So the compromise in the language that we did include states that the prosecutor will negotiate plea agreements in a just and appropriate manner. But we did add the language that was requested about diversion programs and immigration status never being a bar to those. There was a request to require public defenders to affirmatively and competently advise defendants of the immigration consequences of criminal offenses, and that is addressed in section 5C7 of the draft. Okay, so this slide has two requests that are not included in the city draft at this time. I do want to say that I stated at the outset this is a work in progress, this is a draft, but in the interest of transparency and giving you a true update, a status update of what staff is thinking, of what can be recommended and not, I did want to point out these two provisions. So the first request was to require ICE and Department of Homeland Security officers to identify themselves and wear duty jackets if allowed into local facilities. And I'll start with a few federal statutes that I think could raise some concern if that is a requirement in the city. The first one is the federal statute that prohibits restricting the information sharing or prohibiting the information sharing of immigration information with federal agents. I think an argument could be made that by requiring an agent to wear something or else they can't enter the building could maybe broadly be considered the restriction of information they're trying to get into the building to receive more information. And so that is one statute that I am looking at. In addition to that, there are a few federal statutes on obstructing justice, and one in particular prohibits someone from obstructing or impeding any pending matter before any department or agency of the United States. That statute has been cited in other jurisdictions for employees who do impede or obstruct ICE agents from enforcing federal immigration law, so another one to be cognizant about. And just as a general matter, the city of Lawrence is a municipality, and we generally don't have jurisdiction over federal agents. That's a matter that's left to those federal agencies that are enforcing the federal law, and I would liken it to perhaps another agency, another municipality directing the Lawrence Police Department, for example, on what their duty uniforms should say and how they should appear. So the point of that is to say that I believe it's more of a federal jurisdiction issue. And as far as the second one on not allowing ICE or DHS into local facilities for purposes of federal immigration enforcement, I would refer back to that sharing of information statute as well as the obstruction. There is an Attorney General opinion that has some language from Kansas that states municipal buildings are open to the public as a general matter. I ran this question by General Counsel for the League of Kansas Municipalities, and she had an interesting perspective on it, one that I had not heard previously, but she thought it might be a First Amendment issue, actually, that generally, depending on which city building it is, they're open to the public, and when you restrict someone from coming in and talking or gathering in that place, it might run afoul to First Amendment protection. So
Again, this is a work in progress. We're still considering all of these language proposals, but I do want to give a heads up that those two provisions do cause some concern legally for the city. And then finally, there was a request for providing funding for legal representation for local residents in immigration proceedings. That provision has not been included just simply because that is a budget decision for the City Commission to consider. And then finally, the request to provide language services so that foreign language speakers are able to access services. And this was included in several sections, including the overarching one at the very beginning about language services should be provided whenever possible, but then specifically for city clerk, C3H2 5J, that was the communications and creative resources, city clerk, and municipal court. All right, moving on, one of the directions from the City Commission on October 8th was to gauge interest from the Human Relations Commission on whether it feels expanding its scope of duties to include studying and addressing immigration issues in Lawrence is within its capacity. So a special meeting was called on November 4th, which was last Monday, and I provided a general overview to the Commission, kind of piggybacking off of my presentation to this City Commission on October 8th, where I provided some examples of other jurisdictions that have commissions or councils that study immigration issues and how to connect immigrants in the community with city services. And so at the conclusion of that discussion, the consensus or the vote was that studying those issues is within the capacity of the Lawrence Human Relations Commission to consider, and the Commission did not believe additional code authority or changes to the ordinance are needed to take on that additional role. So the ordinance as written, the language under Chapter 10 now allows that body to consider these issues, and no amendments are needed. Next steps will be to receive an update from Lawrence Police Department, receive community input on this matter, direct staff on any desired changes to current draft documents, and/or direct staff to conduct additional research or work. And then staff will plan, unless directed otherwise, to return with a completed product for City Commission consideration in early 2020. So with that, I will hand it over to the police chief for an update on the police policies.
Good evening, Mayor Larson, Commissioners, Chief Greg Burns Jr., Lawrence Police Chief. As Ms. Maria said, this is obviously still a work in progress, but I would like to say that I do appreciate the dialogue that we've had with Sanctuary Alliance. It's been some good conversation. Obviously, this is an ongoing product, and I'm going to keep working to see what I can do with this document, because obviously, as a police chief, when you look at building a policy, they're pretty much made up of three things in policing. They're made up of best practices, making sure that you're following state law, and making sure that you're following federal law. Those are the big three things that policies are made up of. So that's pretty much the foundation that you start with. So when I started with this, obviously we have also a new policymaker called Lexipol that assist us in making policies. It's a policy manager. It is a system that is that aids police departments, fire departments, corrections departments, city governments in making policies that reduces liability based on the three things that I discussed. That they have lawyers, they have retired police chiefs that sort of work on these things, and they take your existing policies and they sort of mesh them together, and then if you don't have one, they have all these other policies for you to sort of look at. And then obviously, coming from my previous department, I had a little bit of experience of working on at least the start of an immigration policy. I'm just going to hit the highlights because obviously it's still in draft form, so I'm not going to read it word for word. Obviously, the first part of it will be the purpose and scope, and obviously the purpose of the policy would be to provide the guidelines for the interaction between the United States Immigration and Customs, better known as ICE, and the Lawrence Police Department. The body of the policy, which would be your next section, pretty much talks about that all members make personal and professional commitments to equal enforcement of the law and equal service to the public. That's how we get confidence and commitment in what we do. It talks about immigration enforcement not being a local matter, that it falls under the jurisdiction of ICE, and that we lack the jurisdiction as local law enforcement to enforce federal immigration. The next section talks about a couple of definitions, which is reasonable suspicion and probable cause. The next section talks about victims and witnesses. This section is obviously important because as police officers, when we look into crimes, and we need everyone's help, regardless whether you're documented or undocumented. We need your assistance in doing our job. So I talk about the need for community trust and cooperation and how that's essential for us to do our job. That we encourage reporting to the police without somebody being concerned that it's going to lead to an inquiry about an immigration status or deportation. It talks about whether you're documented or undocumented, that you're protected under the United States and Kansas constitutions. The next section, which is the arrest notification, talks about that generally we do not make notifications to ICE. However, under some certain felony investigations, it could be feasible. And it talks about how you determine that it's appropriate, talks about the seriousness of the offense, community safety, and impact on the immigrant community. The next section talks about interviews and how when the Lawrence Police Department conducts interviews that we do not conduct them for civil immigration violations only. A subject must be in police custody and being interrogated, regardless of their immigration status, that we'll provide them with a Miranda warning when questioning is taking place. That's rooted in the fundamental constitutional protections. It talks about that our officers will advise suspects which agency that they're speaking with, and that we will advise a person in custody if ICE or DHS requests to talk to them for any reason. And it also talks about translation services being made available if needed or for clarification purposes upon request. The next section goes into the requesting assistance of ICE. And it generally is heavily supervisor driven, and it talks about that that any requests by ICE or any other federal agency for assistance should be directed to a supervisor. and that the department may provide available support services such as traffic control or peacekeeping. We talk about if an officer directly receives a request, if a request is called in dispatch, how on-duty supervisors are supposed to respond to the scene. One of the more important factors is that it talks about under no circumstances will a LPD member detain, arrest, or transport an individual unless they're wanted on a criminal warrant issued by a court or unless there's probable cause for criminal charges. And that if there's a warrant to be served, that we'll try to verify that warrant first. It talks about emergency situations. Obviously, in those situations, a dispatcher is going to send an officer. And I talked about this a little bit before, that in those emergency situations, if somebody calls for help, a dispatcher is going to send somebody. I don't know too many police officers probably in America that's not going to go if someone calls for help. I don't care what the initials are, because unless you have been on that other side of being alone and haven't had anybody there to assist you, you don't know how long 2 or 3 minutes feels. It feels like 2 or 3 hours, especially if you're doing something like taking gunfire or something like that. It's a very long time. So we go, but what we do when we get there is the important thing, and that's where supervisor is, his or her presence comes into play, of knowing if we're not supposed to be there, if what's being done is outside of the norm of our policies, procedures, morals, whatever, we leave. It doesn't matter whether it's KU, Sheriff's Department, whatever the initials may be. We leave if something wrong is being done. It talks about how officers can verify if a warrant is civil or administrative in nature. There's a hotline basically to call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, to sort of clarify that so there's no misunderstanding. The next part talks about the information sharing. Maria covered that. It's the federal law 8 U.S.C. 1373. Next section speaks to immigration holds, which obviously the Douglas County Jail does not fall under the Lawrence Police Department. But regardless, we will not assist in holding anyone solely on a federal immigration detainer. The next section talks about U visas and T visas. Those are basically certifications that the chief of police would sign if someone is a victim of a crime, if they're a qualifying victim of a crime, or if they're helpful with an investigation or prosecution. Then if they're supporting documentation, then I can sign that certification, and it may be able to help them to extend their stay. A T visa has to do with human trafficking. If someone is a victim of human trafficking, and they've complied with the request for assistance in investigation, same thing. That certification can be signed. That certification can be signed by the chief of police or their designee, and then it talks about the chief of police doing a memorandum no later than January 31st of the following calendar year, basically to the city manager stating how many U visas and T visas they've received and approved. And then the final section talks about training and how officers will review the policy yearly to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of it. When we at the first run at this, when this was reviewed, there looked like there was about 9 PD requests from Sanctuary Alliance. On the first run of the policy, it looked like that we were already in agreement on 4 of those. Right now, where it stands, it looks like we're in agreement on 7 of them and have a partial yes on 1 of them, which I think is pretty good for an overall policy. Again, it's not a finished product. Obviously, there's more work to do. Our policy speaks to this is in the city's policy also, but the not discriminating, our policy speaks to that, saying that no member shall stop, question, or arrest or detain any individual based solely upon actual or suspected citizenship or immigration status. And it also speaks in another section to while it may be necessary to determine the identity of a victim or witness, members shall treat all individuals equally and without regard to race, color, or national origin in any way that would violate the United States or Kansas constitutions. Not allowing local funds, personnel, facilities be used for immigration enforcement. That was the partial yes. That's the MOU that has to be approved by the City Commission. Specifically prohibiting law enforcement from complying with federal agency requests to support civil immigration enforcement. Yes, that's talked about. Even when assisting ICE, officers may not detain, arrest, or transport a person solely based on a civil immigration detainer or administrative warrant. The individual must have a criminal warrant issued by a court of underlying probable cause for criminal charges in order to be detained or arrested by an LPD officer. Not complying with the detainer request unless a judicial warrant, same language. Not allowing local LEOs to arrest, detain individuals based on administrative warrants, same language. Clarifying interaction between LEO and NCIC database, limit providing immigration status by LEO courts to database. The Lawrence Police Department does not enter immigration status into NCIC databases. Requiring local LEO to issue immediate public notice to any contact by state or federal agencies requesting assistance with federal immigration enforcement. You know, I talked about this last time, and I've said this several times. I personally have had no instance since I've been here to talk to ICE. When they come, they bring their own personnel. They do their thing and they leave. So they don't notify us. And I believe that, that practice could lead to a potential safety issue, and it may even be a potential legal issue. So obviously there's more looking to do there, because I don't know if that's in the realm of what I could even safely or possibly do. Requiring notice to people in custody if ICE/DHS wants to talk to them for any reason. Yes, members will ensure that suspects are advised of which law enforcement agency that they are, speaking with them prior to the start of any interview, and will advise the person in custody if ICE or DHS requests to talk to them for any reason. Requiring ICE/DHS to notify person's attorney prior to talking to them for any reason and certify having done so. ICE doesn't work for me. I can't make them do anything. So that's going to be a little hard to do, to make them do something. I would assume that they follow the same Miranda rules as everybody else in law enforcement, but obviously I can't speak for them. I think that's a conversation that needs to happen on a federal level. Providing language services so that foreign language speakers are able to access services. Translation services will be made available if needed for clarification purposes upon request. So obviously, we're not 100%, but I think we've got a good portion. It may not read exactly what we want, but it's there. And obviously, I was given some information today that I need to take under consideration, that I will take under consideration. I need to review it. I haven't had the chance to take a deep dive in it yet. Another policy from another agency, and I was given some information from another captain of mine earlier this week that I need to take a look at and take a dive into and see what I can do with that. So obviously, again, this is a work in progress, and but there's been a lot of effort and a lot of work put into this, and again, I appreciate Sanctuary Alliance for what they do. I respect what they're doing, and I will work with them as best as I can. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Any questions for the chief?
Can you talk about, and I don't know if this is you or Craig who would answer it, what is the process for approving an internal immigration administration policy or outside agency assist policy?
What's the process for approval? Pretty much any administrative policy that's a police department policy is approved by the chief of police.
So even if we did work on this policy, that is something that could be changed after this meeting. It wouldn't need to necessarily be a public process.
If it's an administrative police policy, all those I work on. I don't know if I'm really answering your question correctly, but those get final approval from me. Like I said, we have a policy manager that sort of helps us with those. On top of looking at other organizations, other professional organizations. I've read a ton of periodicals about immigration enforcement and best practices, so it's, but if any changes to administrative policy come through the chief of police, any additions to administrative policy come through the chief of police.
Okay. So aside from A through F of the provision of city services, the police department wholly is under a policy that can be unilaterally changed, is my understanding.
If it's appropriate to do so, but obviously policies are updated. And when I talked about the state and federal law and best practices, that's where the policy manager, and that's where following the best policy comes into play. Because with the policy manager, whenever there's a change in law, they would notify us and say, hey, we suggest that you make this change. And then we'll sort of look at it and run it past our legal and make sure that it meshes with what they think as far as those types of changes. Or they'll say, this is a new best practice in policing, which I may already know about or I may not already know about. You may want to look at implementing this in your policies. And that may be something that I do or something that I may not do. But obviously, if something is a best practice and you're trying to be the best police department, you would want to be able to say that you're doing that.
So in order to ensure a public process for the changes of those policies, we would need to codify or add to this list specific core issues that are important enough to our community and the commission to ensure that they can't be unilaterally changed.
If I may, Chief, so I think any of our internal policies, administrative policies, that in any department, including the police department, we're regularly resetting to changes in federal, state, or local ordinances. So any of the laws that would apply, we will reset to adjust and make sure that those are conformed to the law, the legal changes that are coming, or case law, as it may be. Those are regularly being done across all of our departments. So we would regularly do those. So in direct response, if you pass an ordinance, we will have to come into compliance with that through all of our administrative policies, procedures, and our actions.
But comparing the municipal court policy, which includes 7 separate sections versus the one for the police department, it is possible to codify some of those things where it would become a public process in order to change those things, even if it is merely to become in compliance with federal or state law.
I think that's true, as I understand your question.
Okay. I had questions about other part of the policy, but I didn't. Okay. So we had talked about in the meetings that I had the privilege of being part of, talking about when, the issue of folks being allowed in or not allowed into public spaces and the concerns with that, but the possibility of looking at procedures or policies, like we're talking about for front-end staff in order to serve as sort of a gatekeeper to prevent them from necessarily entering courtrooms or getting information about folks. Is that still a conversation that we're having regarding the municipal court piece specifically?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So I do remember when that topic came up at one of our earlier meetings, and because we couldn't accommodate the exact request specifically from Sanctuary Alliance, we have not talked about it since then. If the commission directs staff to try to work something out that could accommodate or create some kind of a compromise, we'd be happy to do that. But again, because we're not matching exactly what was requested, we've kind of moved on from that.
Okay. Thank you. In the Parks and Recreation list for the residents piece, we talked about the possibility, like the library has for, I believe still has, for getting a library card of mail to that address if they're not a lessee, particularly if they have immigration concerns. Was that something that we were going to add or
Yes,
about?
I do remember that question, and I'm terribly sorry. I will have an answer for you tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Includes but not limited to.
I think that I have questions around the police policy, but since we didn't look at that or go over that specifically, I think I will save that for when we do that. So I think that's, for now, all the questions that I have. Thank you.
I have
sounds-
two. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it sounds important that ensuring a public process to changes in any part of the policy will be important.
I have two questions for Maria, or not questions, I just want a clarification. So it's my understanding that we do not have any legal authority to enforce immigration law in our community. Is that correct? That that's under the purview of the federal government?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
The only way that local police officers could get jurisdiction to enforce federal laws is by entering into that MOU with the federal government. But so currently, federal immigration enforcement is a matter of federal jurisdiction, not local jurisdiction. And if the local police department wanted to enforce federal immigration laws, they would have to first enter into an MOU with the federal government, which under the draft language would require city commission approval. Okay. So in order to enforce federal immigration laws, the local police department would have to have an agreement with the federal government, which does not currently exist. So as it stands today, immigration laws are a matter of federal enforcement and cannot be enforced on a local level.
Is that clear? Did you get that? I heard what you said. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the other thing. So the other question or clarification I'd like is that, so the document that we have put together to date, which is a working document both from the police department side as well as the city administration side, that it follows the rule of law, and that there's nothing in it that advocates breaking local, state, or federal law. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Maria? Okay, thank you. All right, we will open it up to public comment at this time. I just want to remind everybody that there's 3-minute limit on public comment for each person.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Mariel Ferrero, and I am going to be making a public statement on behalf of Sanctuary Alliance. I can wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you pause her time? Thank you.
We'll get you. All right.
Do you need me to restate that?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's just
Okay.
go ahead. You start.
Just making a statement on behalf of Sanctuary Alliance. So first, I would like to thank those who have been working with us, the city commissioners, city attorney, assistant city attorney, and chief of police. We greatly appreciate the collaborative efforts that have been going on and look forward to continuing that relationship. So as I mentioned, we're grateful for the continued collaborative efforts. We are supportive of continued efforts to ensure policy recommendations that we have made become reality within codified city ordinance while upholding full transparency to our community. Though there may be best practices and administrative policies that progress towards our goal, the Sanctuary Alliance has always asked for transparent sanctuary policies with legal bearing. This means city ordinances providing equal protection for all within Lawrence, as well as transparency and accountability to the public concerning the use of local tax dollars to further the goals of separate federal agencies. Additionally, we ask for procedures to handle violations of this legally binding ordinance and protections for those who report a violation. City commissioners can take leadership across all city departments to uphold public safety and ensure our local tax dollars do not support oftentimes legally compromised federal law enforcement activities in our community. In doing so, we can reduce our city's legal and ethical liability by refusing to treat our immigrant neighbors in ways that are unjust and inhumane. Commissioners, you also have the opportunity to build trust between all residents and the city staff that serves them. Sanctuary Alliance is dedicated to providing support and safety to all Lawrence community members, to promoting transparency, accountability, and strengthen relationship between our city officials and local residents, and to provide education on current immigration policy with recommendations on how we can best protect our immigrant neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lacey Rowe. Some of this is a bit repetitive, but I think it's beneficial to really emphasize that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is very different from and held to different standards than not just local police, but other federal law enforcement agencies as well. First of all, ICE makes arrests and detains people based on civil immigration law, not criminal law. Local police do not have the authority to arrest or detain someone for a federal civil violation. Arrests based on ICE detainer requests can constitute a warrantless arrest and a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Second, while our local police are held to guidelines regarding anti-discrimination, probable cause, and having a warrant signed by a judge, ICE does not have similar guidelines and instead operates with an alarming amount of discretion and little accountability. In 2017, the White House issued 2 executive orders which eliminated the prioritization of dangerous individuals for deportation and expanded the category of deportable immigrants. These policies target all undocumented immigrants without regard to their ties to the community and without prioritizing dangerous or violent offenders. This year, the Department of Homeland Security expanded the use of expedited removal, a process increasingly used by ICE agents, which raises the chance of people being erroneously deported, possibly to imminent harm or even death, and deprives them of the chance to defend themselves in immigration court even if they may qualify for deportation relief. It is worth noting that since 2012, ICE has mistakenly arrested and detained more than 1,480 U.S. citizens, some of whom spent weeks or even years in ICE detention. Next, ICE is the subject of multiple lawsuits, most disturbingly those which describe inhumane conditions and abuse in ICE detention centers, including thousands of immigrant children reporting sexual abuse while in U.S. custody since 2015. Also worth noting, at least 6 children have died in ICE custody in the past year, compared to 0 deaths in previous administrations. And at least 24 immigrants have died in ICE custody since 2015. Considering the rampant problems and abuse associated with ICE, it's very important that we do all that we can to distinguish and distance our local police from any involvement from ICE wherever it's not necessary. Thank you.
I'm Amy Boffman. Is this on? Hello? I'm Amy Boffman, a citizen of Lawrence. I come before you all this evening to express my concern for our city's well-being. Allowing illegal immigrants to come here without worry is opening our doors to higher criminal activity and higher taxes. It hinders on our low-income residents' ability to get housing assistance. There are longer wait times at health clinics, and it wears on our local food banks. As well, I would like to point the need to be made that our schools are definitely strained by the extra time it takes to teach illegal immigrants because they are behind and not fluent in English. I'm talking about elementary kids. Guess who has to pay for that? Well, it isn't the federal government. If they find out you're running a sanctuary city, we'll lose a buttload of funding. I'm also concerned by the fact that you are willing to cut or reduce funding for our homeless people. Wasn't it 2 years ago you guys declared us a welcoming city? Seems about that long ago our homeless started suffering even more. It's not right to take from people that are so much in need and have every right to be here and yet give to people that aren't even supposed to be in our country. It is wrong of you to ask our law enforcement to look the other way and break the law themselves in doing so. By that logic, you are saying it is okay if we just go around and break laws because we don't like them or we think they're not fair. It definitely doesn't set a good example for our youth. This shouldn't even be an issue. I have seen so many videos of illegals coming to the U.S. They bring diseases, drugs, human trafficking. They are making laws because illegals are killing Americans. Kate's Law. They don't care about us. They take our money under the table and send it back home. They find loopholes so they can file taxes and claim kids that aren't even here. It's a disgrace that the American citizens are taxed and taxed and taxed again, and yet here we are paying taxes on people that aren't even supposed to be here. I remember a couple years back, I saw a Spanish girl in the grocery store. She had 6 kids with her. I said, "Wow, are those all yours?" She responded rudely, "What if they are? It's none of your business." Seemed pretty defensive to me, when in actuality it could well be my business if our tax dollars are helping to support them and they are here illegally. In closing, I would like to say, I'm not a cold-hearted person. I'm not racist. I'm just a tired American. And as our city and country moves closer to socialism, I don't want any of those benefits going towards people that aren't supposed to be here.
Thank you. I would ask that the audience allow the person speaking to say their piece and hold applause as well as any comments. Thank you. Be respectful of each other.
Amber Moela, and thank you for letting us being here tonight.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Amber Moela.
Amber.
Sorry.
You can pull that mic towards you. It flexes. There you go.
I'd like to say, who's paying for the additional cost of adding police, fire, and medical personnel, equipment, and legal fees when the city is sued for $200 million when an illegal commits a murder or rape? Is this a taxpayer's dime? If so, it needs to go to countywide vote in November 2020. And I think that if they're illegal, if they are not here legally, then they need to go back to where they came from. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin.
Hey, my name is Alex Kimball Williams. I'm just going to lean down so maybe you can hear me better. As a colonial settler society, I think it is very ironic that we have a hard time accepting immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. By the way, happy Native American Heritage Month.
Alex, you can, that podium will go up, the podium itself. Is that enough? Oops.
Oh, it moves away as you move it up.
Yeah, it's not helping much, is it?
I think it's kind of funny. One time I brought my own microphone. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. I think as a settler colonial society, it's very ironic that we have a hard time accepting immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Fears about immigration tend to be about ethnic stereotypes around crime, which is incorrect and a racist assumption. Immigrants are less likely to commit crime than native-born citizens. There's also this weird interest in maintaining ethnic homogeneity with the setting of quotas on how many immigrants that we will accept. Another misconception is that immigration has an adverse effect on native-born workers in the country that they migrate to. However, economic journals show a trend of increased economic prosperity with the influx of immigration. Excuse me, I was eating a bagel. Increased economic prosperity with the influx of immigrants. The U.S. GDP would increase by approximately $1.4 trillion if we granted documented access status to undocumented immigrants. Diversity particularly is good for business, and that's why we have pushes for racial diversity in workplaces nationwide. I'm convinced that these economic benefits are probably the only reason for this trend. High immigrant populations are correlated with net positive effect on economic productivity. Why do you think that the United States has the wealth that it does, if not from the genocide of American Indians, slavery of Native Africans, and tangential benefits of our high immigrant population? High-skilled and low-skilled labor immigrants improve the lives of the average American, particularly poor Americans. Increasing deportation rates and tightening border control weakens low-skilled labor markets, increasing unemployment of native-born low-skilled workers. Legalization instead decreases the unemployment rate of low-skilled native-born workers and increases income per American. Immigrants increase economic prosperity. They contribute more to public funds than they can ever expect returns on. They are not inherently more violent, and maybe we shouldn't be so worried about maintaining a white population. Thanks.
You want me to speak my name?
Please.
Okay, it's Kathleen Christian. I'm a resident of Lawrence. Well, I have concerns about Lawrence becoming a sanctuary city. Number one is allowing the police department to ignore federal criminals. Honestly, eventually it's going to create chaos in our city and teach our children to ignore the rule of law. It's just not a good example for our youth. Allowing illegal children to enter the school system is going to place a burden on teachers and our already stressed budget in our school. Not only set our children here back because academically, because these kids are not caught up to the educational level that ours are in this country. Another is their health concerns, possible epidemic of diseases that these people may bring into our city, since most of them have not been vaccinated against common diseases our country has eradicated. and this will end up overburdening our healthcare system and doctors. I have major concerns for our general safety. It is a known fact that MS-13 gangs are drawn towards sanctuary cities, and they create violent crimes against citizens. Also, most immigrants come from a poverty-stricken environment where, no doubt, they have been forced to steal to survive, which has become normalized behavior to them. So this community would have to re-educate these people how to live in a law-abiding community, which will place additional burden on our police, creating overcrowding in our already stressed jails, as well as overburdening our judicial system. I just don't see the common sense in all this. Lastly, we will lose the federal funding that we receive for this city. Can we live with that? I mean, these are just stepping stones of bigger and more complicated problems that will be created. I mean, I care about people, and so does this country by sending aid to other countries to help them. We have no control over their government, how they distribute that aid or whether it reaches the people who really needs it. The main thing is we need to take care of our people first. We're already dealing with affordable housing crisis, and we've thrown the homeless out on the street, and that's another story. But have we learned anything about what's happening in California? The United States has had immigration laws on the books for decades. They have not been lawfully enforced, and these laws have been so mucked around, and it's caused so much confusion, nobody knows how to handle the problem now. It is this country, if this country begins to enforce these laws, including our police department, and not defy them, it is our responsibility to. This town needs to focus on the well-being of its citizens first. We need to make it known that we welcome these people into our country legally, and the key word being legally. No sanctuary city. Please do not turn Lawrence into California.
Thank you.
My name is Martha Connon. I'm 68. I've lived in Lawrence over 57 years, and this is the first time I've ever been to a meeting here. I do not want Lawrence to be a sanctuary city. Right now, I understand that we are a welcoming community. We have welcomed immigrants. We've welcomed all kinds of people from all over the world at the university. Have they been mistreated? Human nature mistreats sometimes, but I'm just saying we are a welcome committee. But I don't agree with illegal immigration coming in here illegally. I'm not against immigration. I have family members. My grandson's family came to the United States. They immigrated here through education. They all, 3 children, 2 adults. They went and became legalized citizens. They did it the right way. My niece that is married to a man from Costa Rica, he is getting his citizenship. He's doing it the legal way. It costs them lots of money. It costs them lots of time, and he has to do tests. So to me, you're condoning to let illegals live here, and they don't have to pay the price for being a citizen. They don't have to pay a price. Why should he try to even become a citizen if you're going to say it's okay to live here because we're a sanctuary city? Also, what I've read, obviously I'm not going to be able to read this all, just sanctuary cities undermine law enforcement and endanger communities. If you want a copy of this, I'd be glad to give this to you. Have you done any research on this, on sanctuary cities? This is an article from Tom Homan, who was at one time a director of U.S. Immigrations, and he says he has talked about how these jurisdictions are un-American, undermine public safety, which I'm concerned about. That I carry a stunt gun now because of what's going on, and we've had several killings. So I am concerned about somebody that doesn't follow the law. Undermine public safety, put the public in harm's way, and make life and more dangerous for our law enforcement. You talked about let's all be a team player or get in a team and be this Mr. Herbert. When you were talking about that new building for the police officers, but you're telling them, don't be a team player with ISIS. Don't be a team player. Don't help them out. Well, I don't know the laws. I'm not a lawyer, but right now in our federal, I understand that there's a possibility, we don't know yet, in the next 3-4 years, depends on how who gets elected, et cetera, who wins, Democrats or Republicans. You can lose your funding. Funding, what? Food to children that go to school, all kinds of funding. So am I going to pick that up if that happens on my taxes? Is that it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Martha.
Okay, but I also want to talk, I sent an email to you and
Yeah,
you.
we've got it.
Nobody, Mr. Boley responded after I called y'all. I sent the same email twice. Mr. Boley called me on.
Thank you, Martha. We need to.
He's the only one that called me, but also he changed his mind because in 2000, whenever you made us a
Martha.
welcoming city, he decided, he's
Martha.
totally flipped over.
Thank you for your comments.
Now, when can I make an appointment with you all to talk to you personally?
Sure.
Well, do I email you because you didn't
Yeah,
respond?
just email.
And you'll respond?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Zach Newby, and I'm a resident of Lawrence. I would like to speak to some of the concern brought to the City Commission by the way of email or public comment tonight opposing the City of Lawrence becoming a legally bound sanctuary city. Quote, crime will increase and property values will go down. The notion of undocumented people as forcing crime rates up is not only factually incorrect, but a popular misconception. So let's address it. Look at the facts. The Marshall Project, which is a nonprofit journal about criminal justice, did a study that compared the estimated number of undocumented folks population in metro areas across the states and compared this data to crime rates published by the FBI. The study found changes in violent crime were flat across metro areas between 2007 and 2016, while undocumented populations grew. They also found that there was a slight decrease in property crime across metro areas between 2007 and 16, and this is all consistent with the quarter-century crime decline across the United States. So crime went down at similar rates regardless of whether the undocumented population rose or fell. Areas with undocumented folks appeared to have larger drops in crime rates, although the difference was small. Another misconception emphasized and a big concern is if Lawrence becomes a sanctuary city, you are preventing our police force from doing their job. Sanctuary Alliance and LPD has already addressed this, saying that it is unlawful for this to happen. So I'm going to talk about the flip side, rather, that ICE can prevent our police force from doing their job. ICE is known for causing significant harm to local communities, including eroding public trust between the community and local law enforcement, impersonating police officers rather than identifying themselves as ICE agents, and devastating the local economy with large-scale raids. Statistics show that the greater involvement of local police immigration enforcement has significantly heightened fears of the police, making individuals less likely to report crimes or come forward as witnesses. Notably, victims of domestic violence are much less likely to report their abuse to police. However, a cooperative relationship between the police and these communities can only enhance public safety and reduce crime. In one of the poorest states, Mississippi, a large-scale raid by ICE led to the arrest of 250 people at poultry plants and left the local economy reeling due to the shortage of workers and the inability of families to pay their bills due to the loss of income. And the director of the Justice Center at the University of Mississippi describes this as a crisis of poverty, despair, and fear. Saying look at the facts may seem cliche, but when folks are willing to put lives on risk on the account of propaganda and literal misinformation, this has to be said. This is no small interest group, but rather a community of over 400 members asking our elected, governing, and legislative body of the city to do research past general misconceptions and make Lawrence a sanctuary city. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Samantha Stoppel, and I'm a Lawrence resident. And I'm here in support of Sanctuary City. And just a few things. Things have been mentioned, concern of this costing us money, but as far as I can understand, the policies that are being set forth won't cost us anything. And if anything, we'll be using less of our resources in support of any issues with immigration status. And some studies have been looked at concerning sanctuary cities, that there are fewer crimes per 10,000 people, like 35 fewer crimes per 10,000 people. The median house income is higher. There is a lower poverty rate, and the unemployment rate is also lower. And they find that in smaller communities, which Lawrence is, and Douglas County isn't excessively large, that this has even more pronounced effects. So I can see nothing negative about us becoming a sanctuary city. And some things that some have said, that we're talking about citizens, but I think what's most important is these are our neighbors, and we need to take care of each other regardless of your immigrant status. Thank you.
Other public comment? Come on up.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. My name's Maureen Horowitz. I don't think...
Ma'am, your name, please?
Oh, I'm
Did
sorry.
she say-
It's Maureen Horowitz.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think anyone would disagree that, at least historically, there have been bad laws and dangerous organizations that enforce those laws. But in the moment, it may be hard to see just how bad they are. The perception that working with ICE would improve the safety of our community could not be further from the truth. Not long ago, in 2015, when several states sought to block DAPA and the expansion of DACA, law enforcement filed a legal brief in amicus siding with immigrants and permanent residents. In it, the Major Cities Chiefs Police Association, the Police Executive Research Forum, and 27 law enforcement leaders stated these increased protections of the rights of immigrants and permanent residents will, quote, improve public safety by encouraging community cooperation with police, an essential element to effective policing and improving public safety, end quote. The only things that have changed since then are the amount of racist anti-immigrant propaganda and the increased power of ICE. It is legal, as the people have said before, for ICE to impersonate police officers, which is one way ICE undermines the trust between communities and law enforcement. Fewer victims and witnesses come forward when that trust is decreased, increasing the likelihood that crime will go unreported. For example, in a 2017 poll, organizations working with domestic violence survivors reported that almost 80% of immigrant victims were scared to report abuse to the police. Unlike the police force, ICE can legally racially profile. That's why in the 7.5 years prior to February 2018, ICE's own lawyers concluded that nearly a fifth of the people they detained were U.S. citizens. As ICE's power grows, like many organizations, they increasingly outsource to private companies using databases and systems from companies like Palantir that are motivated to produce higher yields to increase profits so that the number of false arrests, detentions, and deportations continues to increase, and many deportations are death sentences. As ICE gets bigger, it also outsources more of its detention facilities to private companies like GEO Group and Core Civic, whose first duty it is to make larger profits for their shareholders. People are dying in ICE detention because food, heat, vaccination, breathing room, and medical care cost money. That's the end result of using our city's tax dollars to collaborate with ICE. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bryn Fitzsimmons. As of August, I'm a resident of Lawrence, and as I mentioned to all of you in an email yesterday, part of my reason for choosing to move to Lawrence when I had options for where I was going to pursue my PhD was Lawrence's reputation as a city and as a community that valued all of its members. And so as somebody who moved here on the expectation that Lawrence was a forward-thinking community that sought to support everyone who lives here, I would ask you to all please continue to look at the facts, to look at the research, to look at the citations, the research. As an English person, I'm obligated to say that. Please look at the citations on the research and look at the facts in this conversation, because I think that those are important. I will say that I am here in favor of Lawrence becoming a sanctuary city, and in the spirit of good research, I would like to read a few things that I think it's important to clarify based on some of the comments that have been made here tonight. It is a myth that sanctuary cities will lose access to federal grants. In fact, since immigration is a federal responsibility, cities and counties are not required to enforce federal immigration law in any way, and the 10th Amendment guarantees freedom from federal commandeering of local resources. For example, in 2017, the DOJ announced that it would be withholding federal grant funding applying to the fiscal year 2017 Burn Justice Grant and the COPS hiring program unless applicants complied with ICE cooperation, or ICE Corporation, sorry. The federal district court had found that these requirements exceeded congressional authority and violated the Administrative Procedure Act and the U.S. Constitution. As a result, the federal government's attempts to defund sanctuary cities and counties have repeatedly failed. On August 23, 2019, a federal court granted Santa Clara County and San Francisco permanent protections against the threat to withhold federal funding from the sanctuary jurisdiction. More recently, on October 31, 2019, just a few weeks ago, a Ninth Circuit Court upheld the block of DOJ conditions on grants to sanctuary cities, arguing that the federal law didn't authorize the department to require immigration enforcement assistance as a condition of funding. And so I would, again, just reiterate to please look at the data, please look at what will support everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Parker Mays. I am here talking again. I live at the southwest of town. I am talking again because I'm startled by the sheer amount of disinformation that is being shared. First of all, I would like to foremost represent the statement that was said that deportation is a death sentence. That was said here. I am going to go against that. In fact, I'm going to bring it up again. Deportation is a death sentence. That is what was said. That means that if you're deported to Mexico or another country in South America whereupon there are lots of illegal immigrants, then you're going to die. That was said here. I'm here talking now. The reality of the situation is that there is millions and millions of illegal immigrants in this country. It's 10 million or so. And 800 above 1,000, I repeat, over 800,000 of them are documented criminals. That is why there is ICE. That is why we have cops doing their job. ICE is there for a reason. If you notice the history, and if you notice other countries, if you notice the way that it is rightfully done, I cannot go to Europe as an undocumented person. That's there for a reason. I am here as a documented person because I'm a citizen of America. There is a reason to why we have citizenship, and there is enforcement that is with the ICE agency that should be maintained. There is very solid foundation to the work that has been done and will continue to be done because of the amount of criminals that are currently there. The death rate in Mexico is at some 32,000 people. Recently, there has been even more reports of that gang violence. And we are at an ability to stop it. We have them within our grasp. We have them within the system. We can deport them. We can get rid of these criminals. That is what the system is about. That's what we're trying to do. That is the right thing to do. That is what I am going to support. I am against the idea of a sanctuary city. If you noticed what has been happening and the words and the warnings.
Thank you, Parker. I appreciate your comments.
Hello, my name is Justin Ferguson. I am a resident here in Lawrence. I would just like to address this myth that people should wait in line to come in legally, whereas sanctuary city supporters just want open borders. The reality is that immigration policy currently does not provide fair and equitable opportunities. Furthermore, immigration law is civil law, not criminal law. Recently, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has shown crisis-level delays in the agency's processing of immigrant applications. Additionally, new rules threaten to cut legal immigration in half by denying visas and permanent residency to hundreds of thousands of people for being too poor. There is no one line. There are many lines with wait times that vary wildly depending on the type of green card that a prospective immigrant is applying for, the number of visas available, and his or her country of origin. For example, a brother or sister of a U.S. citizen from the Philippines applying for a family-sponsored visa may have been waiting 24 years as those visas have been oversubscribed according to the State Department's latest figures. And according to Dan Kowalski, who is a Texas-based immigration lawyer, the actual time in line often ends up being much longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan.
Hi, my name is Sarah Cole. And I just want to say that I am definitely in favor of Sanctuary Alliance. And I just want to speak to some values that I'm hearing here tonight, because we already know that there is a crisis in our justice system. We also know that our justice system absolutely depends on legal representation and good legal representation. And so I really want to speak to the portion that I heard tonight that we were not so far considering, funding, legal representation for people who are, facing immigration proceedings. And so basically what I want to say is that I think the values we need to listen to are, if we care about justice, how can we put so much money into a police station for the purpose of justice if we are not also funding legal representation for people who most likely are most vulnerable and in need of that legal representation for immigration proceedings? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I am Chris Flowers. If illegals are such a problem, then what problems exactly are they causing Lawrence? They've lived here for years without any problems. As far as illegals not following laws, how strictly do current citizens in Lawrence follow the law? How many 19-year-old KU students don't drink because it's illegal? How many of us natural-born citizens would fail a urine test for marijuana or other controlled substances? There's at least one person here who would fail that test. Also, there's mention how it's not fair to those who do it legally because they pay a lot of money to do it. And I just want to say, how is it fair to become a citizen here? You can't be poor. I don't think it's fair that only those with money that can afford to pay the fees get to become legal citizens. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me with this? Do I need to speak louder?
Yeah, do you need to move that up? Will
I
it make
think,
a
I think Kurt turned it up.
No, the podium. There you go.
This is fancy. Okay, I think that's better. Hi, my name is Harrison Baker. I live in Meadowbrook Apartments. First, to start with, on the crime issue here, from the Center of American Progress in 2017, there are on average 35.5 fewer crimes committed per 10,000 people in sanctuary counties compared to non-sanctuary counties. We constantly see verbiage about how undocumented individuals will commit crimes and cause chaos. There is little evidence for this. The Cato Institute, a traditionally conservative institute, in March of 2019 estimated that illegal immigrant incarceration rates are about half of those of native-born Americans in 2017. And this includes Texas, and goes on to say that crime along the border is lower than anywhere, but it was not due to the border fence. Homicide rates do not increase simply because of a border, Cato Institute 2018. We think that there is an issue solely because of dog whistle articles and demagogue politicians that bring these issues to the forefront. Undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants, undocumented individuals, people who are here legally or illegally, do not commit more crimes than American citizens on average. We think that they do because of news articles and politicians who use crimes that are committed, and I'm not saying that there are zero crimes committed by undocumented individuals, but they use this as a way of progressing their policy platforms and their racist ideologies. Secondly, cities have already done this without any issue. Look to Philadelphia, where the courts have started requiring ICE to identify themselves to deputies on duty in the room in order to preserve the efficiency of the court system. ICE often disregards its own rules and policies when arresting people, and if a city is assisting ICE, it opens itself up to the potential of litigation and loss of money. For example, in Galazara v. Shalzik, a man was held under detainer for 3 days after he posted bail. The man was released only when ICE confirmed that he was an American citizen. He has subsequently filed a civil rights lawsuit against the United States, the city of Allentown, and Lehigh County, challenging his unlawful detention. After positive rulings by the Federal District Court and the Court of Appeals, he settled with the city for nearly $150,000 in damages. A city cannot lose all of its funding because of sanctuary city status, so this has already been talked about, but I want to reiterate that. And I really want all of us to think critically about a city who cut its funding for the homeless shelter because of lack of funds, and how it could potentially open itself up to more litigation and even more loss of money. And then the final point is how we see these dog whistles constantly. We are a nation of laws is a dog whistle. It is historically and contemporaneously disingenuous. This indeed is a nation of laws, but those laws have included in the past slavery, Jim Crow, bans on interracial marriages, bans on homosexual marriages, the sterilization of people with disabilities, lynchings, concentration camps, and more that I'm sure I can't remember, which are all reasons I stand in support of sanctuary city status.
I'm Cindy Gress, and I am a citizen of Lawrence, and I pay taxes, and I've paid taxes forever here, and I continue to watch them rise. And I guess my frustration is, why do we have to be in a hurry? Why don't we wait and see what happens? Are we mistreating people in our community, and we have to put things in more writing that just makes it deeper? Besides the fact that I emailed all of you guys over a month ago, got no response, re-emailed you, got one response today. Thank you, Mr. Hubert, for sharing that it was going to be on the agenda today. You know, I helped elect some of you guys, and I don't feel like, I feel like I was put off. You're listening to a group of 300 people that are coming in, but let's put this out. Let's have some sessions out in our community and figure out what's right for us. You know, I'm watching the cuts in the homeless shelter. I'm watching that middle-class America can't afford houses anymore here. And, you know, we've got our own big issues going on I think we need to think about when we've been doing okay. And I am the person that is not rich and have sacrificed to help bring my son-in-law to this country the legal way. You know, and do I feel right about letting others come in? And it's not because we're rich, because I loved him and because he did it the right way. And that's what he deserved. And I think that's what we have to do, you know, but why are we hurrying before we figure out what's going to happen with the government? What's so wrong with what's happened now? And do you not give a response when you guys get an email? Just curious. Okay.
Thank you, Cindy.
Hi, my name is Caleb Dinas. I'm a resident here in Lawrence, and I know that many of you won't recognize me, and that's probably because I've only been a resident since July. I moved here from Manhattan, so please don't hold that against me. However, during my short time here, I felt the sense of community embodied within Lawrence, and it shows it's in the appreciation that residents have for each other. And it shows through the progressive policies that Lawrence has adopted through the years. I quickly came to realize that Lawrence is pretty much home for me. Even as a child growing up in Kansas elsewhere, I recognize that part of what makes Lawrence unique is that everyone is welcome here. It is the warm and accepting place that most cities can only dream of being. As a new resident, I've had the chance to watch the city live up to that reputation. Making Lawrence a sanctuary city continues our history of providing a safe place for those that are fleeing prosecution or trying to find themselves. Our undocumented neighbors are just that. They are our neighbors. We should always endeavor to help our neighbors. We must send a message to other cities and towns in Kansas and beyond in this country that we love and support all that live here. In these turbulent times, we all need solidarity, protection, and allyship. When we refuse to help those who need it most, we aren't upholding our Lawrence or even Kansas values. We are turning our backs on what it means to be human. We must send a message that we do not agree with the current administration in D.C. and that we will continue to stand with our neighbors. We cannot abide racism or fascism in any form. It is time that Lawrence lives up to its welcoming and progressive reputation, and it is time that steps are taken so that all of our residents can feel what I have felt. It is time for Lawrence to become a sanctuary city. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? My name is Joey Hensler. I'm here in favor of the Sanctuary Alliance, obviously. I just want to reiterate, right, that every policy set forward in the document that we created with the Sanctuary Alliance has a model in another city across the U.S. And so simply we must look for the model and apply it here locally. There's legal precedent for every single ordinance included in the proposal. And so we can do the right thing, we can stand up for all of our neighbors, and we can reduce our legal and ethical liability to a deeply inhumane and unjust federal administration. The last thing too, right, like there is real harm happening now in our community. There is just boatloads of research on the psychological, mental, and cognitive damage done to children and the immigrant community widely when people live their lives in fear. And people here in Lawrence are living their lives in fear. You can do the right thing, and we have a path to follow. Please keep working with us. We really appreciate that openness and transparency, and together we'll live up to Lawrence's progressive values. Thanks.
Other public comment on this item? Okay, we're going to bring it back up to the commission. So this was to receive an update from staff and direct staff as appropriate if needed. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start. I would say based on Maria's presentation that staff doesn't need a whole lot of direction. It appears that they're moving in the right direction. You know, from where I sit, I don't think that our job is to legislate out of fear or out of hatred. I don't think our job is to legislate out of misconceptions or propaganda. I think our job is to legislate to take care of our neighbors, and I think that's what we're doing, and I think that's what staff knows to do, and it appears that those are the steps that we're taking. You know, an essential part of policing, and it's been a key topic we've had tonight, is establishing, protecting, preserving, and furthering community trust. And it's my belief that the direction that we're moving in is a positive step for that trust. And so the direction that I would hope we give is that we continue down that road.
I will admit that I did contact Ms. Conlon. We had a discussion, and I dispute the characterization that I have totally flipped on my position. I feel I've been consistent in my position. No, you may
Excuse me.
not. I'm
No,
sorry.
ma'am, no. Okay?
So what my position is that I believe very deeply that everyone in our community needs to feel that they can contact city employees in their moments of distress. We need to have our police have people be confident that they can call the police when they need the help that they need, and they need to be confident calling the fire medical services, and they need to have other interactions with city staff without being concerned that they will be deported because of those interactions. And I say that because we need to have a safe community. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're here as a city government, is to have a safe community. And our community will not be safe if we have people who live here who are not confident in calling for emergency services and receiving other services.
Okay.
I want to piggyback on what Stuart was saying. It reminds me of when we were talking about the massage ordinances, which really we were looking to get at was human trafficking. And to me, that's a really important part of what we're doing here tonight. You know, a lot of people that are illegals are preyed upon by people, and this is a way that we can help those people have a small amount of empowerment and community. So I think it's really important to support people regardless of their citizenship. This is how we can help those people that are most in need, frankly.
I think that I want to start by talking about what I heard on the radio today, where the Dreamers were speaking, and that really brought me back to the work that I've done as an immigration attorney, particularly the DACA individuals that I've assisted. And they're not all doctors or attorneys who are going to Harvard, which was a lot of what I heard. Sometimes they were just kids who were really excited to get a job and like have me come taste their chicken soup. And it was awesome chicken soup. And these are humans in our community who are already here, who are already contributing to this community in many, many ways with no thanks from a lot of people. Regarding the policy, I'm thankful that we're going to continue. I'm hopeful the direction will be from the rest of the commissioners that we continue to look at continue to address the Sanctuary Alliance's recommendations. I really appreciate the PD looking at their recommendations regarding the New Orleans policy that we talked about, and there are several others that we're continuing conversations about, and I think that's a vital piece of moving forward on this. I also feel like I would be remiss because I'm trying to be anti-racist and not just not racist, that I got a call from when I was practicing an individual who lived in central Kansas who was an undocumented immigrant who had lived here since they were very young, but they were from Canada. And so in their community, that was 0% an issue ever in their entire lives. And it was never called into question. So we have to acknowledge the racial component of this issue, that unless we are American Indian or we were imported as a commodity to this country, we are all illegally here and have taken over a land that was not given to us. I also think that unless we call everyone who commits a crime illegal, then we are using a really horrible term for a human being. Undocumented is more accurate. Folks who have overstayed visas have not committed crimes, and we don't know why they're here. And if we are concerned about disease, then nobody should travel outside of the United States ever, because that's always a risk. And I felt like I would be remiss if I didn't address those things, and there are probably more that I'm missing, but I think it's really important to bring that into the conversation as we're talking about taking care of our neighbors who are human beings and contributing members of this community. So I hope that we'll continue moving forward on this policy as we have been.
There was something else I wanted to add, if that's all right. When Chris Flowers was talking about, well, I should say more alluding to marijuana usage, I think that's actually a really good example of showing that local municipalities and states are kind of moving forward ahead even of federal policies and determining what laws we want to keep and what ones that we want to change. So when I hear people talk about how things, I guess, should never change, that's not really true. I mean, we see examples already of local leaders leading the way.
Thank you. So I don't think I can add much more than what has been said here tonight, and I do appreciate the comments. I want to reemphasize that the policy or ordinance or whatever it is we're going to call it when it's said and done is that it does not advocate breaking the law, and it is the rule of law. It follows the rule of law, I should say, and that's really that is important to me. But the human aspect of this is that, yeah, we need to take care of our neighbors, all of them, to the extent that we can. So I'm wanting us to continue to go forward. I've really appreciated the conversations we've had with the members of the Sanctuary Alliance. It's been a very cordial and a very forward-looking conversation, and I just hope staff will continue in that direction.
I'm curious if Maria was needing us to come out and say outright about the 3 items that you were talking about. One was requiring ISDHS to identify themselves and wear duty jackets. You were concerned of conflict with other federal statutes. Number 2, not allow IS or DHS in local facilities for purposes of immigration enforcement and concern of it being a First Amendment issue. Are those 2 items that you need for us to agree on, that we want you to continue working on those? Or
Well,
have you
I
already
think because
just-
of obstruction, it was her advice that we not.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
we ought to listen to that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is that something that you need to hear from
Well,
us, or
so-
is that already assumed that you'll not be moving forward on those?
Well, you know, the commission can direct staff. However, but I will acknowledge Vice Mayor's comment on the language request on ICE entering into local facilities you had mentioned earlier, and acknowledge that we talked about not including this exact language, but perhaps other language. I haven't examined it, so I can't give an opinion on it today, but if it is the commission's direction to continue studying alternatives, we can certainly do that.
I would
And then
appreciate that.
bring back a recommendation at our next meeting about this.
That would be great.
Okay.
Is that enough direction at this time?
I sense that it is.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So then we are done with this item. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Really appreciate them.
Maybe we should take a little, just a couple of minutes. Yeah, but they're gonna take their time. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. This is gonna take a little while.
5-minute break. All right, we are on to item number 2 of our work session, which is to receive an update on the City of Lawrence strategic plan.
All right, well, good evening. I'm Danielle Bushcutter, the Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator in the Finance Department. And I'm really excited to be before you tonight to give you an update on the strategic plan. A lot of progress has been made, so I'm really excited to kind of highlight that progress and talk about those kind of few outstanding items that are left to be checked off the list, as well as talk about some of our next steps as we talk about updating our strategic plan here early in 2020. So before I get into kind of the priority initiatives update, I'm going to kind of take a step back and go a little bit through the background and how we got to where we are today. So the strategic plan was initially adopted in March of 2017, and it includes 7 critical success factors and 8 priority initiatives. I've been coming before you about every 4 months to give updates on the strategic plan and anticipate we will continue to do that in the future. I also think it's important to note that we kind of talked about this strategic plan as a 2 to 3 year document. So even though it was adopted in March of 2017, we reaffirmed that after the City Commission election in November of 2017. Just as a quick reminder, so that this is kind of a full presentation, I wanted to note all of the different critical success factors. So we have effective governance and professional administration, safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods, innovative infrastructure and asset management, commitment to core services, sound fiscal stewardship, collaborative solutions, and economic growth and security. Another item that I want to kind of touch base on with you all are our performance indicators. So we have updated our landing page for our strategic plan, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But one of the things that we want to do with this revised strategic plan is to really go in and update the metrics that we use to measure success and kind of measure success within our critical success factors. So we thought because we're going through this update process, it doesn't make sense to do all of that work now and then have to potentially realign them depending on what comes out of that strategic plan update. So we're going to do that once the strategic plan has been adopted again in 2020. However, with that being said, one of the things that I wanted to note is that the city is now participating in the ICMA benchmarking program. And ICMA is the International City County Management Association. And they've developed 80 key performance indicators that cities across the entire country can report on, which really gives us the ability to not only measure ourselves against other communities, but to look at some of those trends year over year. So we started that with the 2018 data, and so once we have our new critical success factors, or if we retain the current critical success factors, we will house those performance metrics under the appropriate critical success factors so that we don't have slightly different definitions for what we're reporting to ICMA versus what we have on our website, so we can have some consistency across those different platforms. I also have mentioned this previously, but I think it's worth noting again that we are also moving the system that we will be using to report all of our metrics, and we're in the process of that as we go through the development process of those initiatives. We'll be using a new system. And so I'll kind of give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what you can kind of expect. So it does look quite a bit different than what we had before. All right, so this is the new landing page. So eventually, after we get the new version adopted, you'll be able to click on each of these critical success factors and see some of those key performance indicators that we've talked about. But some of the information that we have right now is a little bit more robust progress report that in the coming months will become interactive. We're not quite there yet, but you can see where we are with the different initiatives. So I think that'll be a useful tool as we're moving forward. The other thing that we did that I wanted to note is we have actually created kind of a landing page for each of our priority initiatives so that you can get the definition of the initiative, a high-level kind of status update, look at all of the different kind of action items under that initiative, and then get a little bit more of a status summary. So a little bit different view, but I think it's useful information, and that way all of this is kind of housed in one place, and people don't have to know that they need to go to the one of the 3 November meetings to look at a progress report. So it's all kind of right here, and I think it's a little bit more accessible. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that and let you guys know that that change has occurred. Are there any questions so far? Okay. All right, so now we're going to get into kind of the deep dive on the status update for each of our priority initiatives. So 3 we have checked off the list, and the others we are in the process of nearing that finish line, so to speak. So I'm really excited. We'll kind of go into these, walk through what we've accomplished and what's still yet to come. So the first is the advisory board initiative. This by far has the most kind of action items underneath it. So I'll try to walk through those accomplishments relatively quickly, but I do think it's a really exciting thing to note, and something that's worth spending some time on, because a lot of work has gone into all of these initiatives. So this really started with an inventory of all of our advisory boards. Based on that inventory, we had a work session to really review that and identify some potential opportunities to either consolidate boards or dissolve boards, and really have that conversation about what we want, how do we want our advisory boards to look moving forward. In that discussion, we also talked a little bit about board alternates, and ultimately, you all adopted an advisory board policy that really gave some good guidance for how all of our advisory boards are going to be structured moving forward, so that you don't have some advisory boards with different term limits and different processes, really so that all of our advisory boards can follow the same process. We were also able to merge our Joint Economic Development Council into the Public Incentives Review Committee, merge the Lawrence Alliance into the Human Relations Commission, as well as merge the Community Development Advisory Committee, part of their roles into the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and then part of their role was moved over to staff. We were also able to develop a tool to help measure the diversity of our advisory board members. We retained the sales tax audit committee with the renewed sales tax that's now in effect. Repealed 3 obsolete boards, consolidated all of the code boards, repealed the homeless issues advisory committee, narrowed the scope of the social service funding advisory board to be the special alcohol funding advisory board. Updated the airport ordinance as well as the sister cities advisory board ordinance. So a lot of work has been done, but there are still a few kind of outstanding items related to this particular initiative. So the first 2 are related to dissolving 2 of our existing boards, and these are both joint city-county boards, so it's a little bit more labor-intensive than if it were just a city board. There is some additional documentation in your agenda packet. Staff has reached out to the board chair for the Lawrence Douglas County Advocacy Council on Aging to let them know that a recommendation will be coming before you all for consideration to dissolve that board. So you do have her remarks in response to that. The Mental Health Board, in the memo in your agenda packet as well, it kind of talks a little bit about the creation of this board is housed within an interlocal agreement, so it's not as simple as bringing an ordinance before you to repeal that. It's a little bit more complicated, so we're still working on it, but just wanted to kind of give you a status update on those 2 items. Then we're moving into the implementation of board management system, and this is really close to being finalized. So as you start seeing new board agendas and minutes, it will look a lot more like your city commission agendas and minutes. So we're really, we're in the process of getting staff trained, and that should be up and running here by the end of the year. So we're really excited about that. And then the other item we have on here is to engage the Women's Foundation. So we have reached out to them I think this is more of kind of one of those ongoing items, so I don't know that it's something you ever really completely check off the list, but we have had some engagement with them.
Hey Danielle, there was
Yeah.
the police board too, I think that we can add to your list, because we did have the Citizens for Fair and then
An impartial,
it was a very long name, and then we changed that.
we did, yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we ever officially had that as an action item, but it's certainly one that we could add and check off and say we did that, which always feels
Should
good.
add it, feels good.
As someone who has to-do lists, I always appreciate that. All right, so the next priority initiative is related to professional development. So this really started with kind of identifying the gaps that we had in our current training opportunities. And in that process, we realized that there was a gap in non-supervisory training. So we created a full 10-month-long program for non-supervisory staff. But in addition to that, we did some things that are a little bit more accessible to everybody. So we really updated our intranet to really highlight either free or inexpensive training opportunities. We also have an online training software system that can kind of be self-guided. So if you really want some work on, your writing skills or writing a memo, you can go through some training through that program as well. And then we also reviewed our performance evaluation tool. And this has been updated and rolled out, and it's something that we will use in the next kind of formal employee performance evaluation process. So that has been rolled out. There are 2 items under this that have that are a little bit behind schedule, but still very much in the works, and that is to develop a succession planning policy, and then once we have that policy in place is the actual implementation of this. So this is just setting a little bit more structure around succession planning and kind of moving towards that. Although I do think the updated performance evaluation tool, it starts getting us in kind of a good direction for that succession planning policy. So it will be, it's still being worked on, but it is a little bit behind schedule. All right, the next initiative is high-speed fiber. So there were 4 action items related to this that have all been completed. So it really was to identify the barriers to private development, evaluate at the time our existing policy, to identify areas that we could really streamline the process regarding right-of-way management and easements. So back in, I think, June or July, you all passed an ordinance updating our right-of-way management process. So we have completed this item, although I do want to note, and I think it's important to note, that we've had some discussions with you all about expanding this to include digital inclusion. So I think that's a conversation that, if that's an interest of the governing body, something that can be considered as we do our update to the strategic plan. It kind of fell outside the scope of this, but I know there's been conversations and interest from a few of you to maybe bring this up when we go through our update process. Next, we have East 9th Street. So this was 3 action items, which was to determine the artistic elements in that project, approve the design, and then ultimately bid and construct that project. So this was one of the first items that we were actually able to check off the list, so to speak. And East 9th is currently open to traffic, and from a construction standpoint, they're wrapping up a few final things, but from a strategic planning standpoint, we were able to check this off a little while ago. All right, so the facility master plan is an item that has kind of been, I think in some regards, kind of re-envisioned, although we never actually changed any of the action items related to this initiative. So as you can see here, there were initially 6 items. We have completed 1, which was the facility inventory. But really this centered around the idea of having a consultant come in and facilitate a needs assessment to inventory what we had developed, that needs assessment, and then ultimately make recommendations about how we can achieve our facility needs. So I think in a lot of ways we've achieved the intent of this, but we have not achieved it in the way that we initially set out. So through our CIP process, through our 5-year financial forecast process, I think we've been able to address a lot of facility needs along with other capital needs that have been identified. In the last few years, some of the major facility improvements that we've had relate to the Fire Station 1 remodel. You guys talked about the police facility earlier today. There's some funding for a joint municipal services and operation campus in future years of the CIP, as well as some updates to City Hall. We've had the update to City Hall Riverfront. And so I think a lot of these facility needs have been met, and staff no longer believes that it's necessary to bring in a consultant, but that our traditional and our kind of revamped capital improvement planning process is really the appropriate place to bring forward these facility needs so that we can include them in the larger budget discussion. So those were a few of the things that weren't necessarily in place when we initially identified this, but I think are things that we've been able to improve processes throughout the last 3 years to, I think, really achieve a lot of what I think was at the heart of this initiative initially. Questions?
I'm just excited to hear you say staff no longer believes it's necessary to bring in a consultant. I've waited 5 years to hear that. This is
It's your parting gift.
Yeah.
It's your parting
Yes.
gift.
Well, good. All right. The next few items are kind of interrelated a little bit. The next one is priority-based budgeting. So we actually have gone through kind of our first year of this. I was up here last March to kind of present the results of that for our first year, and I think we learned a lot, and we'll continue to incorporate that into our regular budget process. But the one final thing that we have left to do is kind of that feedback loop. So as I'll mention later on in this presentation, we're in the process of developing a community survey. And one of the things that we hope to learn from that community survey is how effective our communication is. So once we get that survey out, we will officially be able to cross the final item off of this list. And then based on, obviously, the information that we receive from that, we can make further improvements or changes to the process as necessary. But we're really, really close on this one as well. The long-term financial strategy, I've kind of touched on this previously, but this is considered completed as well. We have developed and included in our budget document a 5-year financial forecast, adopted a 5-year capital improvement plan through our regular budget process, and have some financial reports for you all. Jeremy was up here not too long ago talking about the third quarter report. Now we go through a budget revision process for our current year as well. So I think we've made a lot of improvements related to these items over the last few years. All right, the last one is the downtown master plan. So we have completed 5 items related to this, and they really kind of focus on developing the RFP, going through the selection process, getting an agreement before you guys, and developing a timeline for completion of this. There is one action item that is a bit behind schedule, the soliciting of input and gathering information. This process has kind of been extended to gather additional information and additional input. And then there are 3 upcoming items. So once all of that is completed, a draft plan will be developed. We will get feedback and solicit feedback on that plan, and then ultimately it'll be brought back before you all for final consideration. So even though there's been that schedule, that timeline's been pushed out a little bit, we're still very much moving forward with this and expect to have it completed in the relatively near future. All right, and then I'll talk a little bit about next steps and what we kind of are going to be doing in early 2020. So we are going to bring in Novak Consulting again for this to help facilitate this process. So they were the group that helped facilitate the initial strategic plan development in late 2016, early 2017. And we thought that they had a good understanding of the process, and wanted to bring them in again to help facilitate that strategic plan in 2020. And one of the things that we've been talking to them about in our initial conversations is really getting a large public engagement process identified to make sure that we're able to get out into the community and to hear from people about what's important to them. So one of the ways that we'll be able to kind of receive some public engagement and some public input is through that community survey. It's a statistically valid survey, and so that'll give us some really good information. But the other thing that we want to do is make sure that we have public meetings and that we can get out into the community and really facilitate a good public engagement process. So that'll be really kind of one of the key focuses as we, from a staff perspective, that we're going to try to do before you all have your retreat with Novak Consulting to kind of talk through all of the information that you've heard and that has been gathered. And then, as I mentioned before, once that strategic plan is adopted, we will go through and update those performance metrics based on those critical success factors. And we'll go through kind of that process again of identifying those action items that fall under each of those priority initiatives as well. So that's kind of what you can expect, and we'll continue to have probably updates through the manager's report as we get closer to some of those dates and we have some of the engagement elements solidified a little bit more. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
I don't have any questions. More, you know, it's just stunning to look back and see how much has been accomplished. And from remembering back when we had the strategic planning kind of retreat in 2016, or was it 2017?
It was, yeah, I think it was February maybe of 17.
Yeah, I was mayor, so yeah, it was 2017. And it's nice to know you have 5 different people and with staff all together and looking and seeing, you know, what do we want to change, basically. What do we all agree on that we want to tinker with, you might say. So I thought that was a really valuable experience, and I'm glad that it looks like it'll be repeated. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the outcome on that will be.
Great.
Any other comments? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I do appreciate it. I think we've done pretty good over the last couple of years to try to get some of this knocked out.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives us a lift into the next phase of this and developing a new plan and going forward. So it's been very helpful to have. Definitely has.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you guys.
And we're done.
Public,
Oh,
Oh,
no.
sorry.
Also, Diane was going to tell us next week.
Okay, sorry. We're not running out of here yet. Public comment for this item. Okay. Okay, Diane.
Yes, so for next week's meeting, we have several regular agenda items that we anticipate, again, you know, a little bit subject to change, but we have a water purchase contract with the State Water Office, some wholesale water agreements, advanced metering project, the discretionary longevity payment for the Lawrence professional firefighters, and a discussion of the concept design for the 19th Street project, Harper to O'Connell. So just
gonna
a
be
few
a
agenda
real short
items.
meeting.
Okay. Will we be issuing bonds on Tuesday?
We anticipate that would be on the consent agenda.
Okay.
But yes, Commissioner.
All right. Is there anything else? Okay, we're done. Thank you.